Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
It was especially so for Angelano, who had been following Osric since that era. Unlike Connor's, who had always been sealed in a hammer, Angelano naturally heard stories about Prince Behir. He had an impression that Prince Behir had to be a refined and cultivated man who had a sophisticated taste in art. He really could not associate this image of Behir with such crazy deeds. That explains why Behir would use the Heart of Stars. Only the Heart of Stars had the power to refine such a complicated mixture of mana, said Angelano. Although he found it difficult to accept the idea, the reality before him forced Angelano to agree with Lin Li's theory. However, the purity of the mana does not make it a perfect one. It cannot escape one problem, continued Angelano. You must be referring to the drainage of mana in the process of transfer. Indeed, mana that has lost all attributes is just like an original source of energy. It will be drained in the process of the transfer. Speaking of this, Lin Li paused. Since he could think of this, he felt that Behir had to have thought of this issue as well. Why wouldn't he have the ability to resolve this problem when he had the skills to create the Heart of Stars? Mana transferring tubes, cried Angelano and Lin Li in unison. The purer the mana, the harder it would be to control. However, since Behir had the ability to create the Heart of Stars, he should have the ability to create a mana transferring tube that was compatible with the Heart of Stars. Lin Li could not wait any longer. He knew that anything that was compatible with the Heart of Stars had to be a magnificent alchemical product. The mana transferring tube that the Caesar family had found would certainly not match up to its value. It was fortunate that no other force went to search the lake while they were discussing the Heart of Stars. They would not have expected Lin Li to leave anything behind. Otherwise, Lin Li would really be at a loss. With a sense of relief, Lin Li leapt into the lake without any delay, much to Evrion's surprise. After entering the water, Lin Li first searched around the location where he'd found the Heart of Stars. Unfortunately, there was no mana transferring tube there. This did not cause him to give up. Lin Li expanded his search area and finally found a tube that was stuck in a crack at the side on the walls of the lake. However, Lin Li could not help but feel disappointed when he got hold of the tube. This mana transferring tube was definitely not as durable as the Heart of Stars. Although it was left behind after the explosion, there were obviously some signs of damage. Lin Li could only comfort himself by hoping that the knowledge he and Angelano had in alchemy could help repair the tube. Are you kidding me? Why do you not collect all the treasures together? Joseph screamed internally. He was frustrated when he saw Lin Li come out of the lake with another item. If he had not obtained the heart from the Whispering God, he would have vomited his blood out of depression. Although Behir incubation room was extremely spacious, it was overturned very quickly by the hundreds of people who searched through it. It was unfortunate that there were too few valuable items. The number of treasures that each of the forces could obtain was limited. However, everyone but the Mithril Alliance was using the life potions supplied by the Tower of Dusk while searching the incubation room. As a result, their combat energy had already recovered to a certain extent. After they put themselves together, the higher-ups from the four forces met up to discuss the search of the next level of the mausoleum. The Mithril Alliance was not in a good shape. Many of their injured members had only just regained mobility. Their healing potions would not suffice if they wanted to recover their combat energy in a shorter time. Yet, the Mithril Alliance could only submit to the peer pressure exerted by the three other forces. They could only hope that they would not need to participate in any battle in the short time. The door on the other side of the incubation room opened slowly. When Lin Li saw the scene on the other side, he sighed with a great sense of relief. Behind the door was not a pathway that led to the next level. It was instead a long and spacious corridor, with tightly shut doors on both sides. Since it was a relic site they were not familiar with, they naturally could not let go of any possible clues. Hence, the adventure team slowed down and started to survey the rooms along the two sides of the corridor, hoping that they could find information related to the mausoleum. The men discovered something unusual when they saw what was behind the first door. The room did not seem like the usual burial chambers in average mausoleums. Instead, it seemed like a room for the living. Although the display in the room was simple, there was a desk, chair, bookshelf, and a bed. However, they could easily tell that it was left vacant for a long time. Is this really Behir's mausoleum? Everyone had the same doubt as they looked at the furniture in the room. There had been many discoveries of High Elves' mausoleums after the Dark Age, but this layout was certainly not a common sight, unless this was a unique look adopted by the royals. However, there were no other useful clues in the room other than some High Elves' furniture. It seemed like the room had never been occupied by anyone. Of course, this was not unusual for the men. After all, who in their right mind would choose to stay in a mausoleum? The subsequent doors revealed rooms with an identical layout. When opened, It wasn't until the team opened one of the rooms in the middle that they saw a different scene. This room was different from the others. It looked like a conference room. What attracted all of their attention was the table in the middle of the room. There were papers filled with words scattered on top of it. The men were increasingly confused by Berhere's mausoleum. They could explain the huge amount of magic gears and traps on level 1 that was expected of a mausoleum. Those ghost warriors on level 2 made sense as well. They proved that they were indeed in the mausoleum of Prince Berhere. Everything strayed from their expectations when they saw the remains of the magical beasts. It was, after all, uncommon for remains of magical beasts to appear in a mausoleum. Their doubts only deepened when they reached level 3. Who in the right frame of mind puts an incubation room in a mausoleum? What shocked them further was the terrifying monster inside the incubation room. They had thought that those magical beasts had to be grown in the incubation room. Now, even Hoffman could not help but start to doubt their initial findings. Lin Li entered the room and picked up a few pieces of paper from the table. He could tell from the browning edges that the paper had been on the table for a long time. Despite this, he could still recognize the high elven print on the paper. Lin Li's expression became serious after he translated the first statement on the paper. That was because he realized that these records were about the Whispering God. The Whispering God was something from the endless world, and Lin Li had never expected anyone in this world to have a knowledge about. But now, the name of the Whispering God was clearly written on the piece of paper. The content was mostly about the Whispering God as well. Oh, so that monster was the Whispering God. That explains our tough wrestle, one of the higher-ups from one of the other forces exclaimed. They were reading from the pieces of paper as well. It was only now that they knew that it was the Whispering God, which they'd dealt with. Lin Li continued to read the contents on the paper quietly by himself. His astonishment only grew as he read on. It seemed like he was holding the growth records of the Whispering God, and the author of the records was immensely meticulous. He noted down all sorts of changes the Whispering God underwent on a daily basis. Who is Kalaros? Could he be the person behind all this? Hoffman muttered as he read the papers with furrowed brows. Who? Hoffman's comment caught Lin Li's attention. Lin Li had just finished reading the several pages in his hands. Kalaros, said Hoffman as he passed the paper to Lin Li. He continued, I am guessing he has to be the author of these records. Lin Li and Hoffman exchanged their records. They thought about all the famous high elves, but could not seem to recall any whose name was Kalaros. However, they could deduce from these records that Kalaros had to be someone Berhere had great trust in, someone who was like a manager. There were not a lot of logs in the room, probably just a dozen of pages. Everyone exchanged what they had, and managed to finish reading all of them. Yet, the content of the observation logs made everyone look very uncomfortable. Apart from the growth of the Whispering God, there was information about research on undead creatures. Since they had defeated the Whispering God, it did not matter how shocking the logs were about the creature. It definitely would not affect the rest of their journey here. However, the logs regarding the research on the undead creatures talked about an existing humorous weir legion. It surfaced concerns about an inability to control the legion due to the lack of a king-level humorous weir. Knowing that humorous weirs had to be in the legendary level at the very minimum, they were confident that it wouldn't be that much of a problem if there were 8 to 10 of them. However, what Kalaros mentioned was a humorous weir legion. How would it be called a legion if it was only made up of such a small number? Furthermore, he even mentioned a king-level humorous weir. These two things would be a tremendous threat to the expedition. Let's discuss if we are going to continue this expedition. Hoffman spoke as he casually pulled a chair and sat by the table. It seemed like he was prepared for a long discussion. The rest of them looked at one another before joining Hoffman at the table. This would not be an easy question to answer. After all, each of the forces had invested their full strength into this mission. They had suffered significant losses when they battled the Whispering God earlier. If they were to wrestle with another humorous weir legion, it would not be meaningful for them to conduct this expedition any further. However, this was just like gambling. The winners would want to continue winning, and the losers would want to cover their losses. The items in the incubation room were not enough to make up for what they lost from the battle with the Whispering God. If they were to leave the place with what they currently had, they would turn this expedition into a money-losing business. According to the blueprint of the mausoleum, it seems to have 7 levels, and we are only on the 3rd one. Even if there is really a humorous weir legion, I'm guessing that it has to be on the last 2 levels, employed to guard against Berhere's coffin. There should be little chance of encountering them on the 4th level, said Claus after a period of silence. He was implying to the team that they should continue the expedition, at least up till level 4. Claus felt that the Caesar family gained the least advantage, as compared to the 3 other forces. The Mithril Alliance acquired the Whispering God's heart, and the Tower of Dusk had obtained 2 valuable items as well. Although the Glitter Gold Trade Union did not gain much, They were not like the Caesar family, that lost such an important trump card. Hence, Claus would never feel reconciled if he were to withdraw in such circumstances. As for the Mithril alliance, Joseph knew that the 4 other families would never agree to the idea of retreat from the mission even if he wanted to. They were, after all, an alliance that consisted of 5 major families. No one would trust that Joseph would share the heart of the Whispering God with them. It would be very troublesome if a humorous weir legion were to exist. However, they would certainly not appear out of nowhere like assassins. As long as we stay vigilant, I'm sure we would discover them before they get to us. With our combined strength, I'm certain that we will be able to overcome them if their number is not huge. Even if they really came on a large scale, I guess we can still retreat safely. That was Joseph. Acquiring the heart of the Whispering God didn't help him feel good after he lost an abyssal demon dragon. Indeed, the humorous Wyrms were no assassins. Their entrance would be accompanied by immense dragon menace and death aura. If it was a large-scale legion, their presence would definitely be no secret. Not to mention that there were legendary powerhouses in the 4 teams. An archmage or a warrior, or even a common man, would also be able to sense their abnormal presence. What do you think, Master Flick? Hoffman turned to look at Lin Li after hearing Claus and Joseph's suggestion. I have no objections, replied Lin Li readily. He had become more and more interested in this purported mausoleum. He wondered what other discoveries were waiting ahead of him. The 4 forces got on the same page very swiftly. They decided not to delay any longer. They went off to prepare their men immediately after they left the room. They solved each of the magic gears and traps very quickly under Angelano's instructions along their journey, managed to pass through long corridors that were filled with deadly traps, and got to the entrance leading to the next level. However, the journey towards the next level was extraordinarily long. The team had to travel what seemed like thousands of meters to exit from the door of the pathway. However, the men who first stepped past that entrance were immediately stupefied when they saw the scene before them. The 4th level of the mausoleum was unlike the previous 3 levels. The environment there did not seem man-made. It was instead a gigantic and gloomy canyon. No one knew whether it was a natural environment. The door which the men walked out of was situated in the wall of the base of the canyon. They had to use the illumination spell to see that the walls on both sides were so tall that they could not see the ceiling. Lin Li, however, was not as surprised as the other men. After all, he was a man who had seen an underworld like Osric's mausoleum. The only thing that concerned him was the massive death aura that was even more pungent than in the Shadowglen near Alana, where the undead creatures congregated. This reminded Lin Li of the log he had read in the room about the humorous Weir Legion. The pathfinders came out from the passageway and got into a defensive formation immediately. The higher-ups from the 4 forces gathered together again. They looked into the darkness of the deep canyon, and no one made the suggestion to advance. These powerhouses at the peak of the legendary realm could all sense the oppression and terror emitted by that death aura. The men gasped when the illumination spells lit up the space around them. The space around the door of the passageway was considered rather clean, but if they looked a little further, they would see that the path ahead of them was filled with a huge amount of skeletons. It was like a path that was made of skeletons. Those skeletons did not belong to the High Elves, the humans, or any other races of intelligence. They belonged to a particular type of mammoth. Should we continue with our venture? Claus asked. His voice was filled with uncertainty. It was clear that he did not expect the canyon to be such a perilous one. No one would be able to imagine what type of undead creature would be produced by the massive death aura. Even if it was just a humorous Weir legion, it definitely would not be one with a small size. It was common for an adventure in a relic site to be risky. However, if the risk was not proportionate to the rewards, it would be a silly thing to persist in it. That was what Claus was thinking about. No one would want to do a losing business. Everyone could tell that there was a huge risk underlying that pungent death aura, and they wouldn't be surprised to see a terrible undead creature that was unknown to Anril. Their concerns were not invalid. No one could see Berhir as a kind being after they met a monster like the Whispering God. To them, Berhir was a lunatic crazier than High Lord Osric. God knew what other freakish deeds he had done. Master Flick, what do you think of this? Asked Hoffman uncomfortably. Although he expected the mausoleum of a royal high elf to be something different, he realized that things were way off his imagination. Flick, why don't we retreat? This place is seriously daunting, cried Angelano in a shaky voice. He hid behind Lin Li before the latter could even say anything. To him, being beside Lin Li would be the safest after his alchemy colossus. He nearly stuck his whole body onto Lin Li. Lin Li was hesitant when he saw the scene in the canyon as well, but he felt too indignant to retreat. Let's look at the situation first, replied Lin Li after a moment of hesitation, and sent a warlock's eyes into the deeper regions of the canyon. Lin Li's reasonable action reminded the rest of the men to use logic. No matter what dangers lay ahead of them, it would only make sense for them to assess the situation before making any judgment. If it was not worth the risk, they could naturally leave the place. Yet, if there were huge benefits ahead of them, they should be reassessing if the risk was worthy of the rewards. Hence, the other mages cast their warlock's eyes. After they saw Lin Li did that, an invisible bunch of warlock's eyes flew past the ghastly skeletons, then through the pitch-black canyon, and finally reached an incredibly spacious region. At this time, all of these mages could not help gasping. That spacious region did not only contain a huge amount of magical beast skeletons, but was also littered with many graves. The largest and most extravagant grave in the center caught everyone's attention. One could guess from the plenty beautiful decorations outside the grave that it was a grave that belonged to a royal high elf. What was more important was its massive magical waves, which the mages could sense through their warlock's eyes. It was likely that it came from incredibly valuable funerary items buried underneath. Although they were unaware of what the funerary items were, they could infer from those great magical waves that the reward from excavating this grave would be a tremendous one. This discovery increased the intensity of their breathing. No one mentioned retreating anymore. They proceeded to control the warlock's eyes to observe the surroundings carefully, hoping to find more valuable clues. The discovery of the grave, however, immediately created great doubt within Lin Li. He remembered from the blueprint provided by the Glitter Gold Trade Union that Prince Bahir's grave was located on the last level of the mausoleum. Even if there were no blueprint, it would not make sense for anyone to put his coffin in the middle level of a mausoleum. However, if the grave did not belong to Prince Bahir, which other royal high elf would it belong to? It would be outrageous for two royals to be buried together in a mausoleum due to traditional beliefs. Such a burial would be incredibly disrespectful to Prince Bahir and any other royal he were to be buried with. Of course, one would only need to look at the tombstone to find out who the owner of the mausoleum was. However, it would be too easy if they could do just that. Many people had the same thought, but none could translate the high elf's print on that tombstone. Although all the mages, even those who had no experience with high elf's language, could pronounce the printed characters, they had no idea what they meant. The characters meant different things in different contexts. Hence, knowing how to pronounce the text was merely reading the text. Lin Li was no different. His study of the high elf's print was futile in helping him understand the meaning of the writing on the tombstone. However, Lin Li knew that he was not the most proficient in understanding high elf's print in the Tower of Dusk. Hence, he turned to look at Basil. He had a glimmer of hope when he saw Basil moving his lips as though he was reading the words on the tombstone. Lin Li asked, "Master Basil, could you translate those words? I can't understand everything there. I can only guess parts of it, and it might not be accurate," said Basil as he shook his head gently. This was better than not knowing anything. Initially, Lin Li felt disappointed when he saw Basil shaking his head, but his spirits were lifted when he heard his words afterward. "Could you tell me what you can understand from it, then?" he asked Basil. "Immortal King, rest this place. Here rests Immortal King. Here lies Immortal King." Basil first did a word-for-word translation before stringing the ideas together. It was an unbelievable one. This gave Lin Li a huge shock. Could this be Immortal King's grave? It did not make sense to him. Although the Immortal King was a royal of the High Elves, he definitely had a higher status than Prince Bahir. The Immortal King was like a god of the High Elves. How would he be buried in Prince Bahir's mausoleum? Most importantly, the Immortal King was known to have nearly reached the level of divine. He even killed one of the dragon aspects, Azardus, the dragon of destruction. Even if the Immortal King could not achieve immortality, or if he had suffered severe injuries in his battle with Azardus, he would not have been buried here without a word. Frankly speaking, Lin Li would never believe that Immortal King would be buried here. However, why would there be those words on the grave? Even if Basil made errors in translation, he felt that this grave had to be related to the Immortal King. Lin Li would never want to stay in the incredibly dangerous canyon even if he knew that there were valuable treasures here. However, the possibility that this place was related to the Immortal King made Lin Li waver. The existence of the debris of the stars, the last words of Norfler's ex-master, the statue of the Immortal King and the Scar of Death, that eccentric inheritance in the Sky Castle, all of them made Lin Li doubt his relationship with Immortal King. Lin Li could not think of an answer, but he realized that he seemed to have a foot in anything related to the Immortal King. Lin Li even suspected Immortal King to be one of the reasons why he suddenly transmigrated from the endless world. Hence, Lin Li had decided to dig deeper into that grave. It did not matter if Immortal King was really buried there. The other men were as shocked as Lin Li when they heard about the possibility of the Immortal King being in that grave. After all, the Immortal King had been portrayed as godlike in historical records and all sorts of legends. With his status among the High Elves, it would be absurd for him to be quietly buried with another royal. However, It did not matter if that grave was authentic or not. It was true that it emitted massive magical waves. The thought of the treasure within that grave eliminated every thought of retreating. Hence, the leaders from the four forces got into an agreement very quickly. They were set to advance and pass through the canyon to uncover the treasures in the grave. Yet, the team faced a problem when they set off. According to what had been agreed upon, the frontliners should be made up of people from the Mithril Alliance and the Caesar family, but now the Mithril Alliance's strength had yet to recover. Hence, Joseph rejected the prior agreement to let his men lead the team. Joseph was not finding trouble with the team. His was the only one out of the four forces that did not use the life potion. Hence, it was true that their injured men were still lagging behind in terms of recovery. Read Lot Street chapters at No. V. E. Ulbin, C. O. M only. This left the Caesar family as the main bulk of the Pathfinder team. Since Claus owed the Tower of Dusk a favor, he did not have the cheek to let anyone from the Tower of Dusk or Glitter Gold Trade Union fill in this gap. He could only unwillingly prepare to send more of his men over. Never mind, let's not talk about finding the way. I've already taken a look of the surroundings along the way just now using the Warlock's eyes, and didn't spot any magic traps or gears. Just watch out for your own team, and be prepared for battle anytime. The Tower of Dusk will walk in front, Lin Li suddenly said with generosity. Although he said that there wasn't a need to specially assign a Pathfinder, the Tower of Dusk would be doing just that by walking at the front. Of course, this wasn't because Lin Li had suddenly become altruistic. After entering the valley, a battle could start at any moment. Thus, it wasn't necessarily the most dangerous at the front and safest in the middle. Moreover, Lin Li's aim was to find clues about the immortal king, while the others were here for the treasures in the tomb. If Lin Li let another faction reach the tomb first, they would definitely start to excavate the tomb once they entered. If they ruined any important clues about the immortal king in the process, that would be something Lin Li definitely wouldn't want to see. Thus, the team that planned to cross through the valley settled the arrangements quickly. The Tower of Dusk would be at the front, followed by the Glitter Gold Trade Union, Mithril Alliance, and then Caesar family. Although the Caesar family managed to escape from the chore of leading, it became the last after much negotiation with the Mithril Alliance. Upon entering the valley, the Tower of Dusk led the team towards the tomb cautiously. A strong death aura surrounded the exploration team, making the atmosphere tense and solemn. No one dared to have any bit of negligence. Everyone used 100% of their concentration, preparing for any sudden attack that might arise. Joseph, who was in the middle of the team, looked at those in front and behind him. He wasn't satisfied with this arrangement, and secretly blamed Claus. Did Claus not know what would happen if the Tower of Dusk was at the front of the team alone? How could he call back his people so easily? Joseph was clear that President Fulik of the Tower of Dusk wasn't someone with noble character and integrity. The reason why he chose to lead the team was because he could reach the tomb earlier than the rest, and gain more benefits that way. In Joseph's original speculation, he thought that both the Caesar family and Tower of Dusk would send out their people to lead the way. That way, the Caesar family could provide supervision and prevent the Tower of Dusk from getting all the shares. Little did he expect that Claus would give up straight away. He didn't believe that Claus didn't see this problem. Thinking back to the life potions Fulik had given to the Claus for free, it seemed that their alliance wasn't so strong after all. In the pitch-dark valley, the expedition team sustaining illumination spells looked like a moving fire snake, maneuvering slowly along the skeletons of numerous giant beasts. However, when the expedition team was about a third into the journey, the ground started shaking violently. Those giant beast skeletons, which had been partially buried in soil, slowly stood up from the ground, releasing an even stronger death aura from their bodies. Indeed, it wasn't the most dangerous in front and the safest in the middle. As each giant beast skeleton stood up, the entire team was encircled by the skeletons. Whether one stood at the front or back of the team became totally unimportant. However, the people in the team were the elites in each faction, after all. Thus, they didn't get flustered by the sudden appearance of these skeletons. Being on their guard all the time, they immediately responded to the situation and stood in the best defense team formation. Although these giant undead beasts had enormous bodies and looked intimidating, their levels were actually not very high. Most of them were about level 17 or 18. The expedition team consisted of hundreds of people, each at least level 15. With their special battle formations on top of that, their power was enough to fight with these giant undead beasts even without considering the legendary powerhouse's power. The battle broke out at that instant. The recitations of spells, the roars of warriors, the buzzing of magic, the clashing sounds of weapons, all kinds of sounds filled the valley that was peaceful and quiet just moments ago. However, this brief interaction with the giant undead beasts made some people in the team, especially the warriors collaborating with the mages from the three factions besides the Tower of Dusk, realized that something wasn't right. They were shocked to find out that while these giant undead beasts didn't have high levels of power, their skeletons were exceptionally tough, as if they were made from steel. The Mithril Alliance and Caesar family mostly used Great Axe warriors as the dominant attacking force. Every Great Axe warrior was at least level 17, with the mages supporting them with all kinds of strength-enhancing magic. Each of their strikes could reach the peak of level 19 in power. However, these Great Axe warriors' invincible Great Axes lost their power when facing the giant undead beasts. Even if it were metal pillars of the same thickness, the Great Axe warriors would be confident to break it into half. However, when the same amount of force was used on the bones of the giant undead beasts, it could only chip down a small bone shard. Moreover, the rebound from the strike was so great that the Great Axe warriors almost dropped their axes. Out of all the warriors, Great Axe warriors were the strongest in terms of attack. Now that the Great Axe warriors couldn't fare well in facing the giant undead beasts, what more the other shield sword warriors, or spear warriors with their significantly lower attack power. As for assassins and archers, they had totally lost their use in this battle. No matter how powerful their bows and arrows were, or what kind of deadly poison they had, they couldn't harm the giant undead beasts even a bit. The great shield warriors, who were in charge of defense, were even worse off. They totally didn't expect the giant undead beasts to be so strong that they could knock down a hill. A brief interaction with the giant undead beasts had resulted in a few of the warriors being thrown into the air together with their shields. Those steel shields were instantly bent after colliding with the giant undead beasts, so much that they could even be used as a pot for cooking. As such, the only ones who could deal effective damage to these giant undead beasts were the mages. However, this didn't mean that the giant undead beasts were weak in front of magic. It just meant that their magical defense wasn't as heaven-defyingly powerful as their physical defense. Back when they faced the Whispering God, Joseph had secretly mocked the Tower of Dusk's all-mage team, because after their archmages had exhausted all their mana, the team would be like cows and sheep waiting to be slaughtered. However, Joseph was extremely envious of the Tower of Dusk's all-mage team now. A warrior above level 15 couldn't even cause more damage than a mage apprentice when facing the giant undead beasts. Compared to the Mithril Alliance and Caesar family, the situation of the Glitter Gold Trade Union's team, which also wasn't an all-mage team, was much better. One of the reasons for it was that they had quite a number of mages in their team, and were only second to the Tower of Dusk out of the four factions. The other reason was that Glitter Gold Trade Union's team had followed after the Tower of Dusk's team very closely. Since the very start of the battle, the mage team of the Tower of Dusk had unleashed extraordinary battle strength, as if they were venting all the frustration they had experienced fighting the Whispering God on these giant undead beasts. Countless high-level magical spells were cast and merged to form a massive magic storm, sweeping towards the giant undead beasts and engulfing them. After the magic storm was over, the gigantic bodies of the giant undead beasts had disappeared, only leaving bone shards all over the ground. Upon being surrounded by numerous giant undead beasts, the legendary powerhouses from the other three factions had all joined in the battle. However, for the Tower of Dusk, the only legendary mage on the battlefield was Alan, who was in charge of leading the mage team. As for Lin Li and the other leaders of the Tower of Dusk, they didn't even need to cast a single magic spell. Only Ufalusi collected some of the bones from the battlefield on and off. However, Lin Li wasn't just doing nothing. He frowned slightly and started to think about the origins of these giant undead beasts. Lin Li had seen many undead creatures before, including Ufalusi, who experted in death magic. He had also stayed at the Darkness Shrine for a considerable period of time. However, these giant undead beasts were creatures he had neither seen nor heard of before. Without any ideas or answers, Lin Li called Ufalusi to his side and asked, "Ufalusi, do you recognize these undead creatures?" Ufalusi politely replied, "I'm very sorry, Master. I've never seen such undead creatures before. Even when I used the Tide of Death, I've never summoned these creatures. However, I've just examined their bones and discovered that their bones seem to be even stronger than those of worms." Stronger than the bones of worms? Could they be made via alchemy? Lin Li could see that the giant undead beasts' bones were extremely hard from the battle between these creatures and the three factions. However, it was rather unbelievable that their bones would be stronger than those of worms. He thought that since Osric could use alchemy to make modifications to Death Knights, it wasn't impossible that Brahir had used alchemy to create these giant undead beasts. Ufalusi didn't have any expertise on alchemy, so he couldn't answer Lin Li. He took out a piece of bone he had picked up and said to Lin Li, "Master, here's a piece of bone I've picked up. As for whether it had been modified via alchemy, I can't make a judgment about that." After receiving the piece of bone, Lin Li flipped it around to examine it closely and his frown deepened. According to his current knowledge about alchemy, it was obvious that the piece of bone didn't have any traces of alchemy strengthening. Its hardness seemed to be innate. However, what other magical beast could possess such strong bones in this world other than the powerful worms? Enormous bodies, strong bones, powerful strength. One could easily imagine how powerful these magical beasts were when they were still alive. Looking at the giant undead beasts on the battlefield, a thought flashed across Lin Li's mind. Could these giant undead beasts be skeletal behemoths? Other than behemoth beasts, Lin Li couldn't think of any other magical beast that had such strong bones and anvil. However, he also couldn't believe that behemoth beasts would turn into undead creatures. Behemoth beasts were said to be powerful beasts from the kingdom of orcs. Although they didn't have any affinity spells or special abilities like other magical beasts, they possessed extremely strong bodies. Even a newborn behemoth could easily rip a lion into halves. Some even said that they were the most powerful creatures that had ever roamed Anril after the worms. Behemoth beasts were like gods to the orcs, just like the unicorn and moonsaber panther to the elves. What was different was that the orcs considered behemoth beasts to be the messengers of the orc god to test their bravery. Thus, every orc chief successor needed to kill a behemoth beast single-handedly on the day he reached adulthood to prove his bravery to the orc god. It was said that Great Chief Saul, who now controlled all 49 tribes of the kingdom of orcs, had single-handedly killed 10 behemoth beasts on his coming-of-age ceremony. However, other than that, the behemoth beasts enjoyed the treatment of sacred beasts. Anyone else who killed behemoth beasts would be considered an enemy of the orcs. With their powerful bodies, the skeletons of behemoth beasts were definitely much sought after by necromancers. However, strangely, it was unheard of that any necromancer had ever successfully converted a behemoth beast skeleton into an undead creature in history. Even Sendros, who possessed the peak of legendary abilities, didn't manage to do that. There were many explanations about the reason for that. The orcs believed that the behemoth beasts were blessed by the great orc god, so their bodies wouldn't be used by those dirty necromancers. The necromancers had a different explanation. They said that when the gods had first created the behemoth beasts, they didn't see a need to give them powerful souls, since they already had powerful bodies. Thus, behemoth beasts didn't have soul fire after they died, so they couldn't be converted into undead creatures. There hadn't been any conclusion regarding this matter. Perhaps both of them were somewhat right, perhaps both were far from the truth. If there was anything that could be confirmed, it would be how impossible it was to convert these behemoth beasts into undead creatures. Because of this, Lin Li couldn't believe that the giant undead beasts were actually behemoths. However, thinking about the whispering god that Prince Behemoth had cultivated and turned into a monosaurus, it wasn't so unbelievable that a madman like Behemoth would create these skeletal behemoths. Lin Li didn't spend much time thinking about these questions. However, it was already towards the end of the battle when he finished thinking about them. Although the other three factions weren't as powerful as the Tower of Dusk's team, it wasn't difficult for their legendary powerhouses to deal with these skeletal behemoths. Through this battle, the other three factions gained a better understanding of the Tower of Dusk's mage team's abilities. Although the legendary powerhouses from the three factions had joined the battle, half of the 100-odd skeletal behemoths were killed by the Tower of Dusk's mage team. The battle ended just as fast as it came. After the last skeletal behemoth had been crushed into bone shards, the valley regained its deathly silence. Compared to the battle against the Whispering God, the casualties in this battle were negligible. After all, the only ones who had been seriously wounded were the few warriors who didn't know what was going on at the start of the battle. After this battle, the team seemed more confident in continuing their expedition. Although the skeletal behemoths were powerful, they didn't pose a threat given the expedition team's level of abilities, and could be said to be even weaker than the ghost warriors on the second floor. If the enemies they would meet later were all of this kind of standard, the expedition later would be a breeze. Continue forward, Lin Li instructed the Tower of Dusk's team. As this was only a small skirmish, the Tower of Dusk didn't even have anyone who was slightly injured. Thus, there was no need for them to rest. Upon receiving Lin Li's order, the Tower of Dusk's mages put up their illumination spells and continued into the depths of the valley while stepping through the bone shards those skeletal behemoths had left behind. Seeing that the Tower of Dusk's team had already started to move, the Glitter Gold Trade Union, Mithril Alliance and Caesar family didn't want to waste any more time and ordered their teams to reorganize their formations. For these elites from the different factions, it was already part of their instincts to get into formations. In mere seconds, the teams had changed from attack formation to defense formation. "Jenny, where are you going?" In the Mithril Alliance's team, Great Shield Warrior Ronald suddenly realized that his comrade, Shield Sword Warrior Jenny, didn't keep up with the team. This was rather strange as Jinny wasn't injured in the battle just now. During normal training, this lad would be faster than Ronald to get into formation. Why was he so slow this time? At the same time, great axe warrior Hanks from the Caesar family suddenly glimpsed a shadow sliding past rapidly in the corner of his eye. When he turned around, all that was left at the position where his comrade was supposed to be standing was his long spear lying on the ground. Although it hadn't been long since the battle had ended, such strange happenings weren't rare in the expedition team. After all, this wasn't a large team of thousands, but a small elite team comprising hundreds. Everyone in the respective factions was very familiar with their teammates, so it was very abnormal for some members of the team to disappear suddenly. Enemies close by. Illumination, mages. Upon knowing the situation, Joseph immediately ordered the mages to put up their illumination spells. He held up his magic staff and sent a solar sphere into the air. The mages from the Mithril Alliance and Caesar family cast illumination spells after hearing Joseph's order. Solar spheres shot towards the exterior of the team one after another. Although nobody was missing in the Glitter Gold Trade Union's team, Hoffman still instructed the mages in the team to put up their illumination spells as a cautionary measure. By then, the Tower of Dusk's team hadn't ventured far from the remaining teams, so Lin Li knew what had happened to the teams behind. He held up his sun's scepter to signal to the team to stop, and then ordered, "Everyone, illuminate the surroundings." The mages from the 4 factions released illumination spells almost simultaneously. The part of the valley which the expedition team was in was instantly bright as day. That was when everyone realized that there were already a dozen fresh corpses not far from the Mithril Alliance's and Caesar family's team. The killers of these warriors were numerous gigantic shadows surrounding the team. They might have realized that they couldn't kill more people silently under illumination, and immediately held up sharp claws dripping with blood, pouncing towards the center of the expedition team ferociously. Ghost behemoths, Lin Li yelled after seeing the appearance of these shadows. The appearance of the skeletal behemoths had already taken Lin Li by surprise. He didn't expect ghost behemoths to appear here too. How could the behemoths, which were said to be lacking in soul and unable to even assemble soul fire, become ghosts? No wonder the Tower of Dusk's team didn't encounter any stealth attacks. After all, the team was completely made up of mages, and had lit up the surroundings brightly with illumination spells all the time. Once the ghost behemoths entered their domain, they would definitely expose themselves, let alone to launch a successful stealth attack. As for the Glitter Gold Trade Union, their team had closely followed after the Tower of Dusk, and also comprised many mages. Thus, they weren't the best option for the ghost behemoths to attack. The Mithril Alliance and Caesar family were more unfortunate. A soul illumination spell couldn't light up a big area, and was only a little better than a torch. Given that the number of mages in their teams couldn't compare to that of the Tower of Dusk's and Glitter Gold Trade Unions at all, coupled with the fact that their formation during the battle was rather sparse, they had given the ghost behemoths a perfect chance to attack. It hadn't been long since the battle with the skeletal behemoths had ended, and these ghost behemoths had already attacked a dozen of members in the team. Although all those who were attacked were warriors, any warrior above level 15 was already a rare talent. In addition, the 2 factions had already suffered huge losses back when battling the Whispering God. It seemed that the 2 factions would pay a high price during this expedition. Although the appearance of the ghost behemoths was shocking, Lin Li couldn't just ignore the fact that they existed, since they were right in front of his eyes. These ghost behemoths might not be as powerful as the skeletal behemoths in terms of strength, but their characteristics as ghosts made them a tougher opponent to deal with. These ghost behemoths could shift their bodies between being tangible and intangible. They also possessed different abilities in different forms. When they were in their intangible form, they could attack the opponent's soul directly, and were immune to all physical attacks just like vengeful spirits, but had almost no immunity to magic attacks. When they were in their tangible form, they gained powerful strength and sharp claws that could easily tear armor apart. They would also be immune to magic attacks, but boast little immunity to physical attacks. Some might think that the ghost behemoths would be easy to deal with since one could easily strike them with magic attacks when they were intangible and use physical attacks when they were intangible. However, in reality, these ghost behemoths were so hard to deal with because they could change any part of their body to another form, not necessarily the whole body. Soon, the expedition team's warriors and mages had all experienced how tough it was to deal with these ghost behemoths. When they stabbed their swords into the ghost behemoths' bodies, all they pierced was a ball of mist. What was waiting for them, however, was the ghost behemoth's sharp claws, which gave people fatal attacks. While the magic attacks of the team couldn't cause any real damage to the ghost behemoths, the ghost behemoth's claws could easily slice through the warriors' thick shields and tear at their souls. When facing these ghost behemoths, that were immune to both magic and physical attacks in this battle. The expedition team had become very passive. All the confidence that they had gathered from the victory against the skeletal behemoths just now was crushed by the ghost behemoths. The Tower of Dusk's team was completely made up of mages. Usually, any team with only members of the same occupation would be more disadvantaged when facing the spirits. After all, the ghost behemoths didn't need to shift their forms when facing these mages, and could avoid all their attacks with their immunity to magic in tangible form. However, the truth was that the Tower of Dusk's team was in a better situation than the other three factions. Although the magic they released couldn't cause any real harm to the ghost behemoths, the shock from these magic attacks was at least able to keep the ghost behemoths away from the team. As such, the following scene could be observed in the battlefield. A dozen ghost behemoths surrounding the Tower of Dusk's team continuously released attacks, but were swept to their original positions by magic storms. For the other three factions, it was a collaboration between the mages and warriors. Usually, this arrangement would be very advantageous when facing opponents with disproportionate physical and magic defense. No matter how high the opponent's physical or magic defense power was, they could target their weaknesses. Thus, the three factions could easily win against the ghost behemoths if they were immune only to physical attacks or magic attacks. Unfortunately, although the ghost behemoths wouldn't exhibit both polar opposite properties simultaneously, the frequency and uncertainty of their transformations made it hard for the mages and warriors to find the right chance to attack. To make matters worse, the method that the ghost behemoths employed to attack totally didn't match their gigantic size. They were like giant assassins. The dark valley made it necessary for the mages to light up the valley with their illumination spells at all times. However, the mages had to release their illumination spells during battle and couldn't sustain the brightness in the valley. Thus, although the mages had all put up their illumination spells at the start, the brightness of the surroundings decreased drastically after the real battle with the ghost behemoths had started. Although it wasn't completely dark, the surroundings had made it difficult for the team to spot these ghost behemoths, making it harder for the expedition teams to defend themselves. All the legendary powerhouses in each faction had joined the battle since it started. Although they didn't expect the ghost behemoths to appear here, they could judge from experience that these ghost behemoths were harder to deal with than the skeletal behemoths just now. However, as the surroundings got darker, even legendary powerhouses couldn't spot the ghost behemoths easily, causing inevitable damage to the team again. From the looks of this battle, it was certainly a good opportunity for Lin Li to deal a blow to the Mithril Alliance. He only had to watch its casualties increase. However, Lin Li didn't do that. After all, this was only the 4th floor of the mausoleum. If other teams suffered too many casualties, it would definitely affect the progress of the expedition later on. With that in mind, Lin Li released the debris of the star's holy light, hanging it over the team's heads like a little sun that had suddenly appeared. Its pure, sacred light instantaneously outshone all the illumination spells around and lit up the entire area. Under such bright light, the ghost behemoths could no longer hide in the shadows and became totally visible to the team. However, Lin Li wasn't altruistic enough to directly help the Mithril Alliance deal with these ghost behemoths. After all, there would be a battle between the Mithril Alliance and Tower of Dusk eventually. Hence, he restricted the power of holy light to make sure that it didn't release its powerful ability of purification and only acted as a light source. If not, these ghost behemoths would be dead right there. However, the holy light was after all a piece of debris of the stars. Even though Lin Li had restricted its purification power, the light still influenced the ghost behemoths somewhat, and the behemoths could no longer change their forms as freely as before. This created a good chance for the expedition. Kill. Great Axe Warrior Hank smashed his two-bladed great axe into the ghost behemoth in front of him. This time, his axe didn't strike thin air. Instead, he felt the real resistance caused by hitting physical matter. Next, the resistance was lifted, and he was overjoyed to find a muscular ghost arm on the ground. Boom! A fireball hit a ghost behemoth that was trying to change its form spot on. A low-level fireball spell was enough to ignite a ghost behemoth that looked like a plume of smoke. The gigantic ghost behemoth didn't even manage to switch into its physical form before turning into a ball of fire and burned out in the blink of an eye. After Lin Li had released holy light, the situation in the battlefield took a drastic turn. The initially helpless team suddenly became extraordinarily valorous, slashing and killing the ghost behemoths as if chopping vegetables. When the battle had ended, nobody dared to relax. Everyone still observed the surroundings cautiously, and only started to care for the injured after orders were given to get into defensive formation. The Mithril Alliance and Caesar family had both suffered much damage in this battle, while the Glitter Gold Trade Union also suffered some casualties. In contrast, The Tower of Dusk, aided by the divine level magical equipment, didn't even suffer from fatigue due to huge mana consumption. Seeing that Lin Li had retrieved holy light, a tinge of jealousy flashed across Joseph's eyes. He was also more cautious of Lin Li. Back in the battle with the Whispering God, Joseph had seen Lin Li summon out Demon Gordon and the alchemy puppets. He had thought that those were already the Tower of Dusk's trump cards, but that seemed to be false from what he saw now. As for claws from the Caesar family, he couldn't help rejoicing secretly in his heart. After getting the life potions from the Tower of Dusk and seeing it display such powerful abilities now, he was glad that he hadn't gone all hard on the Tower of Dusk, like the Mithril Alliance. If not, his faction would have suffered the same consequence as Joseph's team. The Mithril Alliance consisted of 5 major families, so their expedition team was a bit larger in size compared to the other 3 factions. However, due to the fact that they didn't possess any life potions to heal their wounded fast, their fighting strength was now less than half compared to their full strength. Thus, the 2 consecutive battles caused the greatest harm to them out of the 4 factions. Now, they were almost equal to the other factions in terms of numbers, but couldn't match them in terms of power. Claus could totally imagine how it would have looked like for the Caesar family if he hadn't gotten the life potions from Lin Li. The damage from the battle just now would have been so immense that his faction would be forced to quit this expedition. No matter what, the expedition would still continue forward. Although they had encountered 2 consecutive battles, signifying the dangers lying in this valley, no one could resist the temptation of the immense benefits this mausoleum could possibly bring. Strangely, the team didn't encounter any obstacles along the way after that, but no one knew whether this stillness was a good thing or not. The team's anxiety was finally relieved a little after they had seen the mausoleum appearing in the warlock's eyes. Seeing that the team was almost reaching the mausoleum, Lin Li didn't order the team to speed up. Instead, he told everyone to be extra vigilant and slowed down. Since the Tower of Dusk's team had slowed down, the teams following them naturally slowed too. Hoffman knew that Lin Li had his reasons for doing this, so he ordered the same for the Glitter Gold Trade Union's team without any questions or complaints. However, Joseph and other leaders from the Mithril Alliance were unhappy with this. The target was so close and there wasn't any danger in sight. Why did the Tower of Dusk slow down now? Joseph couldn't help coming to the front and asked Lin Li, President Flick, why did you suddenly slow down? Patriarch Joseph, don't you think it's a little too quiet along the way? Lin Li didn't have any intention of inviting Joseph for a conversation. What's wrong with being quiet? We've just had 2 battles. Do you want another one? Before Joseph could finish his sentence, wind gushed through the valley wildly, making him stop in the middle of his sentence. Although this was a valley, it was impossible for such strong wind to exist. It was an underground valley, after all. As such, clearly something was coming. You see, some things will happen even if you don't wish for it to happen. Lin Li raised his Helios scepter and pointed it towards the sky not too far from where they were standing. By then, everyone saw a large flight of humorous weirms in the direction Lin Li was pointing to. These weirms were flying towards the team, and there seemed to be hundreds of them. Could they be the humorous weirm legion mentioned in Caleros' diary? Everyone thought of the contents in the few pages of Caleros' diary at that moment. Seeing that the situation had taken a turn, Joseph didn't have time to ask Lin Li any more questions. He flew towards his faction's team instantly to make arrangements for the tough battle to come. As the most powerful presence out of all undead creatures, each humorous weirm possessed at least level 20 power. The skeletal behemoths and ghost behemoths were no match for the humorous weirms. Nobody knew how long these humorous weirms had been in Prince Bahir's mausoleum. Thus, their abilities would most likely be more than level 20. To make matters worse, there was one humorous weirm whose body was evidently larger than the others. This humorous weirm also released icy cold aura that seemed to seep into one's bones. With the presence of this humorous weirm, the temperature in the valley dropped into negative. Every member of the expedition felt as if their soul was going to be frozen too. Lin Li could clearly feel that the aura this giant humorous weirm released contained not only the unique scent of undead creatures, but also a blood-freezing coldness. Caleros had mentioned in the research log that the humorous weirm legion they created was difficult to control. Thus, a king-level humorous weirm was required to act as the alpha of the legion. It seemed like this humorous weirm with an icy cold aura was likely to be the head of the humorous weirm legion Caleros had mentioned. However, this humorous weirm gave Lin Li the feeling that it wasn't just a king-level weirm. After all, Lin Li had seen quite a number of humorous weirms before, including the king-level ones. One of the 3 skeletal lords of the Shadowglen was a king-level humorous weirm, not to mention that his own humorous crimson dragon could also be considered king-level. However, neither of these humorous weirms were on par with the humorous weirm he was seeing now. Feeling its icy cold aura, Lin Li suddenly thought the few pages of the diary Elvis had shown him during the negotiation with the Mithril Alliance. Didn't Behemoth mention capturing an ice blast weir? Thinking about this, Lin Li felt a cold chill running down his spine. If this humorous weir was really the ice blast weir Behemoth had mentioned, this battle would be more than a tough fight. Ice blast weir Sindera. Impossible. How can you be here? Just as Lin Li was thinking about the origins of this humorous weir leader, Connor's suddenly exclaimed in shock beside him. Connor's words made Lin Li recall some information he had seen before. After he had left the big crack in the Eternal Darkness altar, he had searched for information about the ancient dragons, in order to better understand Flame Dragon Lothar. Although he didn't find a lot of information, and its credibility couldn't be confirmed, most of the legends regarding Flame Dragon Lothar contained another name, Ice Blast weir Sindera. In some legends, Ice Blast weir Sindera and Flame Dragon Lothar were foes. Other than the battle with the Titans, these two dragons would engage in earth-shaking fights every time they encountered each other. In other legends, however, these two dragons were the closest of friends. They were the best partners during the battle with the Titans. No matter how true these legends were, the thing that could be confirmed was that Ice Blast weir Sindera was an entity as terrifying as Flame Dragon Lothar. Lin Li was clear how terrifying a weir with the same level of power as Flame Dragon Lothar would be. Back at the Big Crack, even two Sanctuary Realm powerhouses, Rog and Nifa, were powerless in the face of Flame Dragon Lothar. Since Ice Blast weir Sindera had the same level as Flame Dragon Lothar, its power would certainly be very high even though it had been turned into a humorous weir. Angelano, you have to depend on yourself now. I probably won't have the ability to protect you anymore, Lin Li said helplessly to the goblin hiding behind him. The hundreds of humorous weirs, with a leader that was likely to be Ice Blast weir Sindera, made Lin Li unsure about whether he even had a chance in a battle where the difference in abilities was so great, let alone room to take care of others. Lin Li wasn't the only one who felt this way. Everyone who had seen the flight of humorous weirs, together with its leader that appeared unusually powerful, would bear ominous feelings about the fate of the expedition. Although this expedition team was rather strong in terms of abilities, its enemy now was a flight of 100-odd humorous weirs, each at least in the legendary level. Not to mention exploring the mausoleum, it was uncertain if they could even escape. The weir leader at the center had made the team feel its crushing aura from so far away. It felt as if the sky was slowly sinking down. Even the most powerful legendary powerhouses in the expedition team felt a sense of helplessness. Before the battle started, all the leaders from the four factions had seen Caloros and Behemoth's diary, and confirmed the relationship between these two during the discussion. Thus, they were somewhat mentally prepared for the Ice Blast weir to appear in the mausoleum. This was the exact reason why these four factions could come to a consensus and put down their personal grudges to merge two expedition teams into one. They didn't know how strong the Ice Blast weir exactly was. After all, the end of the prehistoric times and start of the Dark Age marked the decline of the ancient dragons and titans, and they had completely faded into history. By the time Prince Behemoth left the dairy, there were already very few legends about the true ancient dragons circulating around. In the pages of Behemoth's diary, which the Mithril Alliance held, Prince Behemoth used an extremely calm and matter-of-factly tone to write about the Ice Blast weir, making it impossible for people to have any grandiose idea of it. Thus, almost everyone thought that the Ice Blast weir Prince Behemoth had mentioned in his diary was most likely a direct descendant of the ancient Ice Blast weir. However, while the Legion was still quite a distance from the team, the Ice Blast weir that acted as the leader of the humorous weir Legion appeared much stronger than they had expected. Other than the legendary powerhouses, who could barely withstand its oppressive aura, the rest felt difficulty even standing up straight. His chapter is updated by November, bin.co.m. By then, the legendary powerhouses had realized that their speculations about the Ice Blast weir were too naive. Could it be that this Ice Blast weir leader was really the legendary ancient Ice Blast weir that had ruled the skies of Anril? While it seemed rather shocking, they couldn't think of any other explanations for this extraordinary aura the Ice Blast weir had released. There was a huge difference in terms of abilities between true ancient dragons and their direct descendants. While their direct descendants possessed powers unmatched by the weirs present in Anril today, only the best could step into the Sanctuary Realm. On the other hand, ancient dragons possessed legendary-level abilities when they were born, making it easy for them to reach the Sanctuary Realm in adulthood. This made them the most powerful presence in the world. If it was just an ordinary Sanctuary-level weir, the expedition still stood a chance against it given the numerous legendary powerhouses in the team. However, if it was a true ancient dragon that matched the power of gods, the team would likely perish unless there were true sanctuary powerhouses in the team. Master Falik, The situation isn't looking good now. Do you have any way? Hoffman ordered Thomas to take care of the team and hurried towards Lin Li. Seeing the approaching humorous Weir legion, inconcealable worry and anxiety loomed over Hoffman's face, and his voice was trembling slightly. It's too late to retreat now. Other than battle, we have no other way, Lin Li replied bitterly, looking into the distance while grasping his Helios scepter so tight that his fingers went pale. Unless we have a sanctuary powerhouse here, even if we give our all. Joseph and Claus came to the front of the team too, and stood beside Lin Li and Hoffman. In the face of the ancient dragon's suppressive aura, no one had the energy to care about their past grudges anymore. A sanctuary powerhouse. Lin Li laughed bitterly in his heart. If they could deal with the Ice Blast Weir with a sanctuary powerhouse, would he need to be so worried here? With his abilities at the peak of legendary level, coupled with the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, he might still stand a chance when battling an ordinary sanctuary powerhouse. However, if his opponent was the legendary Ice Blast Weir Sindera, that had the same level of power as Flame Dragon Lothar, how could a sanctuary powerhouse compare? Ancient dragons possessed the power of the world's origin when they were born. Thus, they didn't need to realize any world rules like human or high elven mages. It was as natural as heartbeat for them to control the power of the world's origin derived from the fundamental rules of the world. This was the reason why these ancient dragons possessed legendary level abilities since birth, and were able to grasp the purest form of nomological power when they had successfully reached the sanctuary realm in adulthood. Out of all the ancient dragons, the flame dragons that possessed fire element rules, and the Ice Blast Weirs that possessed water element rules were the strongest species. Flame Dragon Lothar and Ice Blast Weir Sindera were the best in their respective species. Both had already reached the peak of Sanctuary Realm, and were halfway into divinity. Their power was probably only lower than that of the 5 dragon aspects. Such a powerful opponent would definitely not be defeated by just 1 or 2 ordinary sanctuary powerhouses. Even sanctuary powerhouses who were at the same level could probably only guarantee their survival when battling Ice Blast Weir Sindera. In the beginning, Nifa dwelt in the great rift of the eternal darkness altar. As a descendant of the dragon of destruction, he mastered the laws of destruction and the laws of evilness. High Priest Rog, who had once fought alongside Garesco, experienced some changes in his physical form, and was probably a bit stronger than the 3 sanctuary realm arbitrators of the Supreme Council. However, the 2 sanctuary powerhouses were beaten up by the flame dragon Lothar to the point where they could not fight back at all. If it weren't for the 2 sacred objects, the Tree of Eternity and the Seed of Eternity, the 2 sanctuary powerhouses would probably have been unable to protect themselves. Heaven and earth might have been ruined too. Lin Li could not imagine how Behir had done it. He had actually captured the Ice Blast Weir Sindera. The immortal king had killed Azardus, the dragon of destruction, with the power of the debris of the stars and the stars of fury, but he still ended up seriously injured. Although the Ice Blast Weir Sindera might not be as strong as Azardus, the dragon of destruction, the difficulty of capturing it was also completely different. Besides, Behir did not have the stars of fury and the debris of the stars. Of course, Lin Li didn't tell everyone about those matters, because that would only make them feel even more hopeless. If things were to go awfully wrong, they might even lose their courage to fight. At this moment, the army of humorous Weirs was approaching, and the expressions of the members of the expedition team became increasingly sullen. From the aura of the leader of the humorous Weirs, that was surrounded by the other humorous Weirs, the numerous legendary powerhouses of the expedition team could completely feel a descending deity that was definitely not simply at the level of an ordinary sanctuary realm individual. What made them feel even more shocked was that other than the fact that it had a massive body, the leader did not seem to have turned into a humorous Weir. Unlike the humorous Weirs that only had their skeletons left, the leader's body was flawless. Upon sight of the Ice Blast Weir, the last hope for luck in their hearts vanished instantly. Regardless of how strong and powerful the Ice Blast Weir might be, it would definitely have some obvious weaknesses, such as having a skeleton without scaly skin covering it. The defensive power of such skeletons would be far from comparable to that of real Weirs. At the same time, they wouldn't have the bloodline of real Weirs either. In fact, even the bones of the humorous Weirs that were generally referred to as skeletons might not be the skeletons of Weirs. Most of the time, they were most likely just bones from other magical beasts, or even humans that were pieced together to form a dragon's shape, with the consumption of dragon crystals. Hence, humorous Weirs could never compare to real Weirs of the same level. That was also the reason the expedition team had not immediately retreated after finding out from Calaros' log that there were humorous Weirs in the mausoleum. However, although the other humorous Weirs could be seen through the fog of death aura formed by the humorous weirs. They were similar to what the people had imagined. They were all just huge white skeletons. The most terrifying thing was the weir leader that was in the middle of the humorous weirs. It did not look like a humorous weir at all, and instead looked like an ancient ice blast weir. It actually really is an ancient weir. Upon sighting the massive body that was becoming clearer in the fog, the members of the expedition team looked horrified. The ancient weirs were prideful creatures, and yet it actually stayed in Prince Berhere's mausoleum for the sake of guarding it. The ice blast weir that was gradually revealed was about as big as the dozen or so humorous weirs around it. It was covered in white scales, each of which was the size of the shields used by the great shield warriors. Besides, they could tell at a glance that the defensive power of the scales was definitely much stronger than the meticulously created shields. The wings on the back of the ice blast weirs were not fleshy like those of the humorous weirs. Instead, they were large and grayish-white, with faintly flashing dark silver patterns on the membrane. Those were bloodline mages that only ancient weirs, with a truly pure bloodline, could possess. Even a master of inscription could not touch the mysteries of those mages that represented the power of the world's origin. The ice blast weir's large skull was also covered in fine scales, and the 6 sharp horns on top of its head were divided into 2 rows. Each horn was like a giant sword that could split the sky. The sturdiest ones in the front were like mountain peaks. Its bloodshot eyes looked like the blood moons that once hovered in the sky of Anril, radiating a cold and brutal light. Its large mouth seemed to be able to swallow the humorous weirs around it in one go. That was an actual ancient weir, which possessed incredible power that was not inferior to that of the gods. The ancient weirs were powerful creatures that had once dominated the world of Anril together with the Titans. Although most of them had never seen a real ancient weir with their own eyes, they were already convinced, for they had heard the legends that had been passed down. However, no one knew that the fear in Lin Li's heart was 1,000 times greater than the rest. When the humorous weirs appeared, he had already taken out the debris of the stars, holy light. However, he had been secretly suppressing its power to avoid any unnecessary changes. In fact, after Connor's called Cinder's name, there was a tinge of imagination and fantasy in Lin Li's heart. He did not have hope, but he did feel like it was somewhat a fluke. After all, Ice Blast Weir Sindera was a powerful existence that was on the same level as the flame dragon Lothar. Given the pride of the ancient weirs, how could it guard Berhere's tomb obediently? There might be a hidden reason. However, as the humorous weirs and the Ice Blast Weir approached, Lin Li sensed the changes in the power of holy light, and his heart sank to the bottom. To his horror, he found through the changes that there was an incomparably thick death aura coming from the Ice Blast Weir. It was far richer than in any undead creature he had ever seen. In fact, even the ghost that Osric had left in the Sky Castle seemed inferior to it. What did that mean? Although Lin Li couldn't believe it, he had to believe that the Ice Blast Weir was probably a true blue undead creature. Apart from it being an undead creature, he could not think of any other explanation for the incomparably rich death aura around the Ice Blast Weir's body. At this moment, Lin Li could finally see the Ice Blast Weir Cinder's appearance through the fog of death, and it further confirmed the terrifying suspicion in his heart. The scales on Cinder's body, something which all weirs were proud of, had lost their original luster and were dyed with a deadly grayish hue. At the same time, the magical aura that flowed through its body was no longer icy cold. Instead, it was mixed with blackness that was full of death. Lin Li then shifted his gaze to the Ice Blast Weir Cinder's eyes, which were like blood moons. He could clearly see that the gaze in those eyes was also extremely different from what he had seen in the flame dragon Lothar. As the king of flame dragons, Lothar's gaze was full of pride, as if all lives before it were like ants. However, the gaze of the Ice Blast Weir Sindera was not cold and indifferent. Instead, it was deadpan, like that of a soulless zombie. Not only did Berhere capture the Ice Blast Weir Sindera, but he also used some sort of method to completely transform it into an undead creature. At the thought of that, Lin Li could not help but be shocked by his own conjecture. It was not about transforming a skeletal warrior, but a real ancient weir that was a powerful existence second only to the dragon aspects. Although Lin Li always learned to use elemental magic and was considered an orthodox mage, he was not clueless about necromagic. On one hand, he had by his side the Lichufalusi, who was good at necromagic. On the other hand, he was on good terms with Sindros, a famous necromancer. Hence, he still had a deep understanding of necromagic. Lin Li knew very well that in theory, necromagic could indeed transform all life into undead creatures. However, there was still a very important condition, and that was that the necromancer would have to possess power far beyond that of the creature that was being transformed. Take Sindros, The most famous necromancer of Anral, for example, he could easily transform a dead soldier into a skeletal warrior, and it would be no issue for him to create even 1,000 or 10,000 skeletal warriors. However, it would not be easy to turn a weir into a humorous weir even though his power was at the peak of the legendary level. Of course, it wasn't impossible for Sindros to do it. However, transforming a humorous weir was not as simple as chanting an incantation and waving one's staff. It still required the accompaniment of a special necromagical ritual. However, even with Sindros' abilities, the success rate of transformation was not 100%, and there was a great possibility of failure. Hence, the amount of effort and time spent on the transformation would definitely be astonishing. The bloodline of the current so-called weirs was actually much weaker than that of their ancestors, and adult weirs only possessed legendary level abilities. The Green Dragon King in the lair in the Ga mountain range was merely level 24, yet it was already the king of a clan. Clearly, their bloodline had greatly weakened. As for the real ancient weirs, they were not to be trifled with. Lin Li couldn't even imagine what kind of existence in Anral would be able to turn an ancient weir into an undead creature. Besides, it was not an ordinary ancient weir, but the Ice Blast weir Sindera, which was halfway to becoming a god, and was considered an elite powerhouse amongst ancient weirs, just like the flame dragon Lothar. At least in Lin Li's perception, perhaps only mythical figures like the immortal king, or the god of mages, Garesco, could do it. However, when he was thinking of the two mythical figures, a thought suddenly flashed in Lin Li's mind. He wondered, or could it be the queen who also existed in the myths? However, the current situation no longer allowed Lin Li to make any more conjectures. The hundreds of humorous weirs were getting closer and closer with the Ice Blast weir Sindera. At this moment, he had to find a way to beat the enemy. Master Hoffman, get your men closer to us, and take these with you, Lin Li said while touching the ring of endless storm on his finger, after which 10 six-pointed star arrays appeared on the bare land beside him, while 10 brand new magical crystal cannons appeared in the arrays. Compared to magic props like the war god's shadow and the shape-shifting insect hive, the magical crystal cannons did not have an interesting background or an ever-changing attack method. However, when used appropriately, they would instead exert effects that were not inferior to those magic props. Hence, there would always be some spare magical crystal cannons, which could be used during emergencies in Lin Li's ring of endless storm. He had not taken them out when he fought the Whispering God, because the Whispering God had the characteristic of devouring all mana. The humorous weirs that they were facing now could not absorb the light of the magical crystal cannons, although the magical crystal cannons had a single method of attacking where they would merely compress and condense mana before launching it. Even legendary powerhouses did not dare to belittle the massive power they contained. Coupled with the rapid attacking speed that made them difficult to dodge, they were perfect weapons for fighting against humorous weirs. With the financial power of the Glitter Gold Trade Union, it would not be difficult to get some magical crystals, since they could just purchase some from the Dwarf Kingdom with money, which was unlike powerful magic items that were unattainable. However, bringing the magical crystals, there was not an easy task. Space-related magical items were already very rare, and even Hoffman and the others only had 1 or 2 of them, which were only a cubic meter or so of space at most. Perhaps they couldn't even fit a magical crystal cannon. They were probably used for storing items like potions and expedition necessities. Only Lin Li's ring of endless storm, which had an almost infinite amount of space, could be used to store the magical crystal cannons. Upon sight of the 10 brand new magical crystal cannons, Hoffman's eyes suddenly lit up. Although they could not play a big role in the situation that they were in, and it was impossible to rely on them to wipe out the humorous weirs, it was better than nothing. At least the team could last a little longer under the attacks of the humorous weirs, with the support of the 10 magical crystal cannons. Time was running out, so Hoffman didn't bother being polite. He simply waved his hand and ordered the team from the Glitter Gold Trade Union to approach the mages from the Tower of Dusk and pull the 10 magical crystal cannons over at the same time. As soon as the magical crystal cannons were dragged towards them, the people of the Glitter Gold Trade Union immediately prepared to load them with magical crystals. Although they could not bring magical crystal cannons along to the expedition like Lin Li, the Glitter Gold Trade Union was still wealthy enough to afford the magical crystals. However, when they opened the mana source of the magical crystal cannon and were about to put in the magical crystals that they were holding, they could not help but be stunned as if they had momentarily forgotten about the threat posed by the humorous weirs. They couldn't believe their eyes at all. The mana sources of the magical crystal cannons were actually large legendary magical crystals. Using legendary magical crystals as a mana source was too extravagant even for the Glitter Gold Trade Union that had rich financial resources. However, The 10 magical crystal cannons of the Tower of Dusk actually used 10 legendary magical crystals as the mana source. In the world of Anral, even a legendary magical crystal that had just reached level 20 could be considered a priceless treasure that was hard to find. Yet, the Tower of Dusk used them as a mana source for the magical crystal cannons. Even Elvin and Thomas, the legendary masters, were flabbergasted due to the Tower of Dusk's generosity when they saw the magical crystal cannons, let alone the archmages. However, what was truly shocking was the fact that an incomparably huge six-pointed star array had already surfaced in the open space beside the Tower of Dusk, occupying almost half of the area in the canyon. As it reached the peak of its brightness, a massive steel colossus slowly rose from the six-pointed star array as if it were rising from the surface of water. "An alchemy colossus," yelled someone who recognized it. However, the crowd soon realized that it was by no means as simple as an ordinary alchemy colossus. The massive steel colossus that rose from the six-pointed star array was numerous times larger than the alchemy colossuses that they knew. The complicated alchemical magoths and alchemy arrays on the colossus body only bedazzled them. It was a legendary Titan-level alchemy colossus. When Joseph saw the full appearance of the alchemy colossus, an incredible conjecture suddenly popped up in his mind. In the current era when alchemy had declined, even ordinary alchemy colossuses were considered quite rare, and could only be produced by the mysterious country of alchemy, Rotterdam. Besides, Titan-level alchemy colossuses only existed in myths and legends. Legend had it that even Rotterdam didn't have the technology to create a Titan-level alchemy colossus. Joseph thought that the young president of the Tower of Dusk had played all the cards he had during the battle with the Whispering God in the incubation room. However, it seemed that the alchemy puppets and the abyssal demon Gordon that Lin Li had released previously were nothing to him compared to the Titan-level alchemy colossus. In the legends, the Titan-level alchemy colossuses possessed power that was near the sanctuary realm. In fact, even ordinary sanctuary powerhouses were likely to be defeated by a Titan-level alchemy colossus. Upon sight of the Titan-level alchemy colossus, Joseph had no idea how he should feel. On one hand, he naturally hoped for the expedition team to be stronger since they were facing a crisis now. However, on the other hand, he truly did not want the strength of the Tower of Dusk to grow to the extent that he would be afraid. When the alchemy colossus got out of the six-pointed star array entirely, Angelano maneuvered the alchemical machine and fled to the bottom of the alchemy colossus before getting inside it, in the blink of an eye. As the alchemy arrays and the alchemical magoths on the alchemy colossus body lit up, the giant pillar-like alloy spear moved about in his hand. Angelano finally found some sense of security. The appearance of the Titan-level alchemy colossus made everyone feel extremely shocked. However, the current situation did not leave them with any chance to lament further. On the Glitter Gold Trade Union's side, Elvin and Jeremy aimed the 10 magical crystal cannons and immediately commanded their team to quickly change their formation in a bid to maximize the effect of the magical crystal cannons. At the same time, Thomas once again took out the golden sculpture of the war god, releasing the 10-meter-tall war god's shadow that was emitting a pale golden glow. The teams of the Mithril Alliance and the Caesar family made their own preparations to engage in a battle at any time as well, following the instructions of their superiors. Although they all knew that the enemy had become extremely powerful to the extent that they could not be matched, they knew that they would be pushing themselves towards the abyss of death if they were to retreat out of fear. All of a sudden, the temperature in the canyon plummeted, and a large ball of white ice flames was spewed out from the mouth of the approaching ice blast Weir, Sindera. It then smashed into the expedition like a meteor. Everything in the path of the ice flames seemed to have become frozen, and the cliffs were coated in white before shattering with a thud. The glittering powder and the frozen rocks of various sizes fell into the canyon like an avalanche, causing it to look like there was a blizzard in the canyon. The massive ball of ice flames that froze everything shrouded the entire expedition team. Almost at the same time, the legendary mages raised their staffs high in their hands, exhibiting their strongest defensive spells with all their might. A curtain of colorful light covered the team. Boom! The layers of light shattered in response to the sound, and the mages who had their defenses broken didn't even dare to wait for the surging magical waves in their body to calm down. They immediately began chanting some magical incantations, and the light from the gemstone on top of their staffs continued to erupt, doing their best to compensate for the defensive light curtain that collapsed. A casual spout of dragon breath from the ice blast Weir caused the legendary mages to use almost all of their strength, only to barely block the lethal ice flames. That traumatized them. The ancient Weir was unstoppable and truly unparalleled. However, even if they could not fight it, they couldn't possibly give up on resisting and allow themselves to be slaughtered at its will. In the face of the powerful ice blast Weir, Lin Li felt powerless. but that didn't mean that he had lost the courage to fight. He abruptly raised the Helios scepter and exclaimed, "We can't let ourselves be beaten up and remain passive like this. Those above level 22, come with me to fight the Ice Blast Wyrm. Leave the humorous Wyrms to the rest." Before the crowd responded, Lin Li immediately charged towards the Ice Blast Wyrm, using the power of flight. On the Tower of Dusk's side, the legendary mage Basil, Conorus, the Lichufalusi, and the vampire Norfaler all followed Lin Li without hesitation. Upon sight of that scene, Hoffman, Thomas, and the sword sage Jeremy dared not hesitate at all. They immediately charged upwards like arrows shooting straight into the sky. After watching the legendary powerhouses of the Tower of Dusk and the Glitter Gold Trade Union charge towards the Ice Blast Wyrm, Joseph gripped his King of Flames staff forcefully. Following a change in his expression, he led Elvis and the patriarchs of the three other families to join the attack of the teams of the Tower of Dusk and the Glitter Gold Trade Union against the Ice Blast Wyrm. Although Joseph wished he could have a chance to drastically weaken the Tower of Dusk's strength, he knew clearly that it was definitely not the time to harbor those thoughts, because they were facing a crisis at the moment. Even if the numerous legendary powerhouses of the expedition worked together, they might not be able to survive in the face of the strong and powerful Ice Blast Wyrm. If he were to have other thoughts and cause others to be in trouble, could he possibly escape? With the addition of Claus and the three elders of the Caesar family, there were 17 legendary powerhouses fighting against the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella. All of them were at level 22 and above. There were even legendary powerhouses like Lin Li, Conorus, Thomas, and Elvis who were at the peak of the legendary realm. They also had powerful magic props like the war god's shadow. If they were outside, they would probably be strong enough to overthrow even the Felon Kingdom. Most sanctuary powerhouses would probably choose to retreat if they met them. Unfortunately, their opponent was an ancient Wyrm that dominated the skies of Anril during the prehistoric times, the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella, which was second only to the 5 dragon aspects. Although they did not know what method Behir had used, the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella had already lost its sense of self at this juncture, and it was just like a powerful zombie. However, the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella did not control any humorous Wyrm and make it join the battle against the 17 legendary powerhouses who were besieging it. Perhaps because of its pride as an ancient Wyrm with the low rumbling of a dragon roar, the humorous Wyrms beside Cinderella immediately split up and pounced straight onto the expedition in the canyon without even bothering to look at the legendary powerhouses. In the blink of an eye, only the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella and the 17 legendary powerhouses including Lin Li, who were flying over quickly, were left in the sky. Each of the hundreds of humorous Wyrms possessed legendary level power, which could similarly pose a lethal threat to the expedition. However, with the current situation, Lin Li and the others had no other option but to let the humorous Wyrms pounce onto the team below. It wasn't appropriate to say that they had left it up to fate, but it would be unreasonable to say that they were expecting them to destroy the hundreds of humorous Wyrms. They could only hope that they would last as long as possible. The only thing that was in the favor of the expedition was the local terrain. Although the canyon was very wide, the hundreds of humorous Wyrms couldn't all rush down at once, and probably only about half of them could fit. In other words, only 50-odd humorous Wyrms could go down. The remaining half hovered at a low altitude above the canyon, and would occasionally spit out some dragon breath at the expedition. Lin Li and the others did not look down at all. It was not that they didn't care about the lives of their men, but rather that no matter how difficult and dangerous the situation the expedition faced was, it was definitely not as difficult as that of Lin Li's group of elites. The massive pressure coming from the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella that belonged to a sanctuary powerhouse made Lin Li and the others find it difficult to breathe. The mana that was constantly flowing through their bodies became incomparably stagnant at this moment. At the same time that the humorous Wyrms dispersed, intense magical waves suddenly erupted in the void, and countless sharp ice thorns appeared out of thin air around the legendary powerhouses. As if they had transmigrated through space, they then shot towards them at the speed of lightning. Under the powerful suppression of the Ice Blast Wyrm Cinderella, the strength of the legendary powerhouses was greatly affected. The sudden attack immediately forced them into a dangerous situation. It was only the beginning. The legendary powerhouses who had thought that they would at least be able to put up a fight had already fallen into a disadvantageous position, without even getting the chance to cast a single magic spell or swing their swords. Fortunately, Lin Li had set a minimum of level 22 for the powerhouses that were going to follow him. If it had been a legendary powerhouse, who had just recently stepped into the legendary realm, he would probably have been destroyed by the ice spikes at the moment. The ice spikes should be considered to be of the lowest level spells amongst the ice series magic. Even a level 5 mage would be able to cast it. However, if the ice spike magic spell was cast entirely with nomological power, each seemingly insignificant ice spike would simply be sharper than any other superior grade magical weapon and legendary magic spell. Under the attack of the ice spikes, even legendary level magic spells would collapse. All of a sudden, the legendary powerhouses in the sky were forced into dire straits, and those who were less powerful even sustained severe injuries. However, although the sudden attacks were powerful, they were not beyond the psychological capacity of the powerhouses. After all, the other party was a strong sanctuary powerhouse, and it would seem abnormal if it did not cast such powerful magic. What truly horrified them was the fact that they did not notice any difference despite being in their own magical domains. It was simply too terrifying. When in the magical domain that they had created themselves, legendary mages would be the controllers of the magical domain, and no abnormality would escape their detection. Besides, the other party was using magic. Even a sanctuary powerhouse would not be able to cast magic spells without any magical waves. Hence, it was obvious that they had lost control of their magical domain even though it still existed. They no longer seemed to be the controller. It wasn't the clash of magical domains that would usually happen when legendary mages fought against each other, but rather that an existence of a higher level was devouring it. The entire sky was filled with snowflakes that fell into the magical domains of the legendary mages, including Lin Li. Even the magical domains that contained fire elemental laws seemed to be at an abnormal temperature. They could not melt even a single snowflake. Lin Li, who had already comprehended the sanctuary realm a bit, could be considered to be the powerhouse, who was the closest to the sanctuary realm, and the most powerful one amongst all of them. However, at this time, Lin Li's light and darkness domain was just as vulnerable in the face of the ice blast Weir's ice domain. The entire light and darkness domain had become an icy snowfield, and each snowflake contained extreme elemental laws of water. Although the light and darkness domain was created with basic laws, Lin Li clearly couldn't compare to the ice blast Weir in terms of his mastery of the laws. Let alone Lin Li, it was the same for the rest. While they were breathing, they heard a loud bang from not far away, and the magical domain of a level 22 legendary mage from the Mithril Alliance actually collapsed and disintegrated as it could not withstand the immense pressure. The legendary mage himself spat out a mouthful of blood with the collapse of his magical domain, obviously having suffered severe injuries. If it weren't for his companion beside him, who had quickly shielded him by casting a defensive magic spell in time, he would have been blown to pieces by the flying snowflakes. Upon sight of that scene, everyone panicked and put away their respective magical domains, which were of no help at all anyway. They did not want to be crushed to the point of collapsing and sustaining injuries. Lin Li was the only one who was still maintaining the light and darkness domain. At the same time, he raised the Helios scepter high in his hand abruptly, and instantly condensed the light and darkness sword, which slashed at the ice blast Weir Sindera forcefully. That was the first attack that the expedition team had launched against the ice blast Weir Sindera. The appearance of the light and darkness sword was like a stone that was plunged into water as the sky that was full of flying snowflakes became tumultuous. The snowflakes started flying faster, and they also condensed into a silver python that circled around the light and darkness sword. It created sounds of collisions, and the light and darkness sword that could easily tear apart a legendary mage's magical domain actually shattered in the collision before it could even get close to the ice blast Weir. Lin Li's face was slightly pale. He was genuinely frightened. The light and darkness sword was not condensed with the power of light and darkness that he had mastered, but with the purest nomological power of holy light and gloomy dark. He even added a hint of his comprehension of the sanctuary realm. Even the magical domains of legendary mages, who were at level 22 or level 23, might not be able to withstand it, let alone magical domains like Steven's. He initially thought that it would at least cut the Sindera even if it was just like a tickle. To his surprise, it was blown apart only halfway through its trajectory. That scene had undoubtedly brought an even greater shock to everyone, and they could feel the amazing power contained in the light and darkness sword. Even Joseph, who detested Lin Li, dared not go toe-to-toe against the sword. However, the sword did not even manage to touch the ice blast Weir Sindera. Was that the difference between the sanctuary realm and the legendary realm? The pinnacle of the legendary realm was claimed to be infinitely close to the sanctuary realm, but as long as one did not cross the threshold, the distance would be infinitely huge. However, no one dared to slack off at all at this juncture, regardless of whether they were frightened or feeling cowardly. While putting up the crumbling defensive magic spells, the legendary mages raised their staffs and cast the most powerful magic spells that they could with all their might. All of a sudden, the sky became incredibly vibrant, and amidst the flying snowflakes, lightning, fire snakes, and wind dragons swarmed towards the ice blast Weir, as if they were going to drown it. The condensed swords, 1, did not fall behind, either. They passed through the crowd and stabbed at the ice blast Weirm's body with immense power that could tear the sky. Howl. The sound of a dragon roaring emotionlessly filled the sky. With the roar of the dragon, all of the attacks disintegrated in an instant, be it offensive spells or swords. They disappeared immediately and went up in smoke like torches that fell into a pool of water. However, shortly after, the snowflakes in the sky began surging, and then charged at everyone with intense killing intent. The legendary powerhouses who had always been high and mighty finally experienced what it was like to be insignificant in front of the ice blast Weirm Sindera. Even though they were already regarded as godlike existences by ordinary people, and seemed to possess the power to destroy the heavens and earth, they were actually no different from those ordinary humans now. They were just insignificant small fries that were at most a little stronger than the others. Facing the attack from the ice blast Weirm Sindera, which seemed to be rather casual, they did not have time to catch their breath at all. The sounds of their magical shields shattering were incessant, and everyone was trying their best to release their defensive magic spells. If they weren't careful, they might die with their corpses torn into pieces. Lin Li was not having it any better as well. Those attacks were simply unavoidable, and there was no other way but to defend against them with all his might. Although he was still wearing his space-related magical robe, the entire battlefield was filled with deadly snowflakes, and there was nowhere he could go even if he used space-related magic spells. In his hands, the glow of the Helios scepter was constantly flickering, and all he could do was desperately put up layers of magical shields. If 10 weren't enough, he would add 10 more. However, that wasn't enough, so Lin Li continuously released defensive magic spells, yet he still felt the snowflakes getting closer and closer to him. Not far from Lin Li was Confronting, who was also in a state of exasperation at this juncture. The eternal frost blade in his hand was constantly cracking in the space around him. Every crack that appeared was like a long whale drawing water, sucking the surrounding snowflakes into the cracks. He seemed to be having an easier time dealing with it than Lin Li. However, only Confronting himself knew that it wouldn't be easy to cut through and create some spatial rifts even with the power of the eternal frost blade. If another sword sage, who did not have the perfect body created by Osric, had been in his place, he would probably have exhausted his power in a few shots. However, even with the perfect body, Confronting knew that he wouldn't be able to hold on for long. After all, he still wasn't a sanctuary powerhouse like Rodhart. Hence, after desperately trying to create a temporary safe space for himself, Confronting induced his power into the eternal frost blade vigorously, and slashed towards the ice blast Weirm that was far away. Following the trajectory of the eternal frost blade, a beam of light spanning across tens of meters flashed before disappearing without a trace. Boom! The disappearing sword light directly traversed thousands of meters before appearing in front of the ice blast Weirm Sindera again. It then slashed at Syndra's throat. After a loud bang, the snowfall stopped, and the snowflakes that contained massive power instantly disappeared without a trace. Everyone found it a little hard to accept the unexpected change, and there was even a legendary mage who continued to cast defensive magic spells. Was that a surprise? When they shifted their gazes to the ice blast Weirm's body, they felt a chill in their hearts. The light of the sword did hit the ice blast Weirm's throat, but it didn't even break the ice armor on it, even though the sword was powerful enough to cut a Weirm into two. Damn it, I couldn't even hurt it. Confronting cursed after failing to injure the ice blast Weirm. Although he never thought that he would be able to severely injure the ice blast Weirm Sindera with his sword, he found the fact that he had failed to penetrate its defense incredibly absurd. Could Confronting even break the magic spells of the ice blast Weirm Sindera? It was a sanctuary powerhouse that mastered the lethal power of elemental laws of water. It did not have to rely on chanting spells to cast magic like ordinary mages. Perhaps it merely wanted to change its approach. However, the pause could be considered breathing time for the crowd. However, they did not use it to attack the ice blast Weirm. Instead, they used all sorts of methods to strengthen their defense. The situation just now made their hearts ricochet, and no one knew what powerful magic spell the ice blast Weirm was going to cast next. Since their attacks had no effect on the ice blast Weirm, they would try to save their own lives for the time being, regardless of the outcome. However, Lin Li had no intention of giving up the opportunity. In fact, he had already raised holy light in his other hand when he sensed the change in the magical waves around him. Since the light and darkness sword doesn't work, I will try this. At that moment, a magic array that was as tall as a person suddenly appeared out of nowhere in front of Lin Li. The entire magic array was filled with milky white light, and the center of the magic array was the debris of the stars, holy light. As the magic array rotated, a blinding ray of light darted out of one of the origin points on the magic array. When the light reached its peak, it converged in a central point that was 1 meter in front of the magic array. Updates T and Vel by Boom. A ray of white light that was as wide as a bucket darted out from that point immediately, causing ripples to form in the space, emitting the purest holy aura of the world before quickly shooting at the ice blast weir Sindera. Judgment of light. Upon seeing the white light and feeling the pure holy aura, everyone couldn't help but gasp. They even forgot what they were doing. The judgment of light was one of the most powerful theurgies of the Brilliant Shrine, and less than 5 members of the Brilliant Shrine could perform it. It was said that only the most devout believers of holy light, who had been personally taught by Pope Rosario, could perform it. However, the other party was one of the mages the Brilliant Shrine detested. Even though the Brilliant Shrine had become less harsh to mages in the recent years, they couldn't have possibly imparted the most powerful theurgy to them, could they? Besides, even if a mage learned it, he wouldn't be able to cast it. Would he really believe in that ethereal god of light? There had been many rumors about the relationship between the Tower of Dusk and the Brilliant Shrine in the Breezy Plains. However, to most people, it seemed to be only a cooperative relationship. Even if the rumors said that there were holy paladins in the Tower of Dusk, no one would believe it unless they saw it with their own eyes. The holy paladins were the bodyguards of Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine. They usually wouldn't leave the holy mountain. However, even if they couldn't believe it, the incomparably pure holy aura could not be fake. They couldn't help recalling the rumors that were spreading across the breezy plains. They wondered if they might be real. However, no matter what thoughts they all had in their minds, they saw a glimmer of hope when they saw Lin Li suddenly display such a powerful judgment of light. Regardless of how strong the ice blast weir was, it was still an undead creature, after all, and the purifying effect of the holy light on undead creatures was well known throughout Anral. Although a single strike could not purify the ice blast weir, they reckoned that it should be able to give it a huge blow. Everyone watched expectantly as the light pillar, filled with pure holy aura, blasted a large hole in the death fog that surrounded the ice blast weir Sindera, striking it hard on its chest. The ice armor that blocked Connor's astonishing sword attack seemed to lose its effect under the judgment of light, as the light pillar blasted into the ice blast weir's body with little hindrance. The light that erupted at that instant almost engulfed half of the ice blast weir's body, dazzling and bright like the sun, so much so that they did not dare to look at it at all. Upon sight of that scene, almost everyone's heart was filled with ecstasy and euphoria. Even Joseph, who saw Lin Li as his enemy, was no exception. Of course, they also knew that a single shot of judgment of light would not be enough to completely purify the ice blast weir. However, as long as they could hurt it, it would at least show that fighting was not necessarily futile, and there was a chance of survival in the hopeless situation. However, when the light dissipated, the crowd was disappointed to find that although a hole had been born in the ice armor on the ice blast weir's chest, its body didn't seem too damaged. No one knew how to use holy light magic, but they knew very well what undead creatures looked like when they were purified by holy light. Besides, they could clearly see the hole in the armor being restored in the blink of an eye. Even the judgment of light didn't work. Could it be that we really have to? Feeling disappointed, a despair-filled thought rose up in the hearts of almost everyone. Even Lin Li himself couldn't help but be horrified when he saw the result. The judgment of light was imparted to him by Pope Rosario when he was a guest at the Brilliant Shrine. It was claimed to be the strongest manifestation of the purification by holy light magic. Over the 1,000 years since the establishment of the Brilliant Shrine, the undead creatures purified by the judgment of light were all fierce and ferocious undead kings that were turned into dust. Naturally, Lin Li knew that compared to Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine, his abilities were far inferior. There was still an incomparably huge gap between the sanctuary realm and the legendary realm. However, the judgment of light that Lin Li exhibited did not require his own power. Instead, it was the debris of the stars, holy light, which contained the purest laws of light. However, even so, the judgment of light formed by such a power was probably only slightly inferior to Rosario's in the Brilliant Shrine. Yet, the debris of the stars, holy light, did not cause any damage to the ice blast weir Sindera. If the judgment of light couldn't even break Sindra's defenses, Lin Li would resign to fate since his abilities were inferior. However, the problem was that the judgment of light had pierced through Sindra's ice armor. Hence, the purification power should have been directly applied to the other party's body, yet it hadn't even produced the slightest effect. It was an undead creature. Of course, that was just Lin Li letting his imagination run wild while he was feeling bewildered. Lin Li was well aware that the ice blast weir Sindra's rich death aura was enough to prove its identity as an undead creature. He reckoned that the judgment of light was unable to work because of the maniacal Prince Berhir. God knew what he had done to Sindra's body. However, the ice blast weir clearly wasn't going to give the crowd much time to breathe. As soon as the light dissipated, it suddenly let out a deafening roar, and the entire space trembled forcefully. The people who were floating in midair found it hard to stabilize themselves, and some even almost fell straight down. Next, A terrifying magical wave spread out in all directions with the ice blast weir in the middle. Massive snow tornadoes that were hundreds of meters tall instantly took shape, colliding with the crowd with a destructive force. As they spun at high speed, even the space around the tornado seemed to have become distorted. One could feel the great pulling force even from a great distance. In the blink of an eye, the legendary powerhouses in the sky were forced into a desperate situation again. Apart from fleeing, there seemed to be no other solution for them. At the same time, the expedition began fighting the humorous weirs, taking advantage of the terrain. However, they seemed to have entered a brief stalemate. The absence of Lin Li and the senior executives of the four forces had a large impact on the expedition, but that did not mean that they had completely lost their ability to resist. The Tower of Dusk's team in particular still acted as mainstays of the battle. Even though 5 of their strongest legendary powerhouses were absent, they managed to sustain the attacks of 20-odd humorous weirs alone, and at least at this moment, none of them lost the upper hand. During the battle, the one who displayed the most eye-catching performance was not Angelano, who was controlling the Titan-level alchemy colossus, but the archmages who had yet to reach the legendary realm, and were the lower-level members. To anyone else, those archmages could at most continuously cast defensive magic spells when facing the legendary-level humorous weirs before collapsing. However, to everyone's surprise, the mages of the Tower of Dusk actually still had the spare energy to counterattack against the humorous weirs when they were keeping up with their defenses. Besides, their attacks were full of power, and almost every attack was capable of causing substantial damage to the humorous weirs. 1. Possibly sword energy attacks or something, not weapons per southeast. The net array was originally created by Garesco, the god of mages, according to the characteristics of the human mages, and it had more advantages than disadvantages. At the end of the Dark Age, Garesco's magic legion won against the High Elves during the war to overthrow the rule of the High Elves, all thanks to the net array. The High Elves had always claimed to be the best race. In fact, compared to other intelligent races, they did have various unmatched advantages, especially in terms of their comprehension of magic. It would not be difficult for them to enter the legendary realm at all. As long as they grew up and became adults, they would almost certainly become a true legendary powerhouse. It seemed that the differences in standards of the High Elves could only be distinguished at the Sanctuary realm. However, there were still many sanctuary powerhouses among the High Elves. Compared to the High Elves, human beings were indeed rather terrible at magic. For most human mages, the legendary realm was far-fetched and an insurmountable moat. The more exaggerated thing was that even below the legendary realm, almost every level could be considered a threshold. Some were stuck at level 15 and could not advance to become an archmage, while some were stuck at level 10 and could not pass the threshold to become a magic shooter, and some could not even become a mage apprentice. They could not feel magical elements at all. Hence, they could only resort to selecting simple professions, which only required the use of power, like warriors, assassins, and so on. Every outstanding mage often had extremely high attainments in martial arts. However, humans had an advantage that the High Elves could not compare to, and that was the vast population of humans. Although the High Elves had a long lifespan, their reproduction ability was weak. Even in their heyday, there were only a few 100,000 High Elves. However, it was a different case for humans. Even though the lifespan of humans was only a few decades, their fertility trumped the reproduction rate of the High Elves. With a huge population base, they could form a team of mages that would outnumber the High Elves even if only 1 out of 1,000 people was selected. However, quantity did not equate to quality. Even if the humans had 1 million archmages, they would seem just like a bunch of ants to a real sanctuary powerhouse. That was the reason the High Elves did not pay much attention to humans. In the face of a difference in realm, numbers were not significant at all. The advantage that the humans had as a large population was not considered an advantage in the eyes of the High Elves. However, Garesco, the god of mages, managed to see that, and he also created a solution to turn that into a real advantage, the magic net array. Under the connection induced by the magic net array, everyone was a node of the magical network. All of the archmages were connected, forming a huge network. The concept was akin to hundreds and thousands of weak wooden bars that would form a strong pillar that couldn't be broken when they were bundled together. Under the connection of the magic network, they would no longer be separate individuals, but parts of an entity that was the magic array. The magic array was a whole, and could even be regarded as a person who had the power of all the people in the network. Hence, the opponent of the humorous weir was not a group of 100-odd archmages, but a person who possessed the enormous magical power of more than 100 archmages. Although compared with the true legendary powerhouses, archmages still did not have an adequate understanding of the rules, their specialty was something that even a true legendary powerhouse could not do. They were flexible with their division and fusion, and could divide themselves according to needs. A true legendary powerhouse could not split himself in two at once, but the mages that were connected by the magical network could do so. They could not only split into 2 or 3, but they could split into more. That allowed their tactics to be more flexible, and also added variance. That was something that no genuine legendary powerhouse could do. That was precisely the reason that the group of archmages, from the Tower of Dusk, which no one took seriously, could engage in a battle with 10 odd humorous weirms, and even look like they had a chance of winning. Each and every humorous weirm of that group had legendary level strength. They were not in the early stages of the legendary realm. Most all of them were about level 21, and there were many that were at level 22. The dragon breath that they exhaled possessed power that was as great as legendary magical spells. A swipe of their claws would not be inferior to the full blow of the sword sage. However, the 10 odd powerful humorous weirms were blocked by a light curtain that kept them away from the team of mages from the Tower of Dusk. That layer of light seemed to be a bubble that could be blown away by a gust of wind. However, under the fierce attacks of the humorous weirms, it showed extraordinary resilience. The humorous weirms tried to use their sharp claws to tear it, or bombard it with their dragon breath. They also tried to cast their dragon language magical spells, but in the end, they were still unable to break through the defense of the mages of the Tower of Dusk. The mages of the Tower of Dusk did not blindly defend, and instead continuously displayed powerful legendary magical spells such as Thunder Explosion Spell, Hurricane Spell, Sky Burning Spell, and many others that were extremely powerful. The magical spells continuously penetrated the defensive layer of light, fiercely bombarding the bodies of the humorous weirms. That was not only because of the magic net array. Actually, even a group of mages from the Alana Guild of Magic might not be able to cast such extravagant legendary level magical spells. At this moment, the excellent magical equipment that the mages were using had also reflected its due value. Even though they had cast legendary level magical spells at high frequency, no one showed signs of exhaustion or depletion of mana, and it was as if all of them had infinite mana. However, as a powerful existence that was at the top of the hierarchy of undead creatures, a humorous weirm was not going to be defeated that easily. They were not pieced together by random pieces of bone, and although their bodies were not immune to most magical damage, their dragon bones were extremely difficult to destroy. At the same time, the intense death aura that surrounded them also provided them with great defensive power. Even the powerful legendary magical spells could only deal them a small amount of damage that would heal with the death aura in the blink of an eye. The mages of the Tower of Dusk and the 10 odd powerful humorous weirms entered a stalemate. No one could do anything to the other party for a while. Get lost, you bunch of disgusting bones. Come closer, and you might get smashed into bone meal by Lord Angelano. Angelano roared hoarsely in the battlefield in the canyon through the alchemy colossus. Despite the massive sounds of the magical spells and the cracking of the boulders, Angelano's voice was still rather clear. The alchemy colossus that was being controlled by Angelano was worthy of being a Titan-level alchemy colossus that was known to be equal to a sanctuary powerhouse. Despite facing the siege of 7 humorous weirms by himself, he still had the upper hand. Under Angelano's manipulation, the alchemy colossus waved the pillar-like alloy spear in its hands without seeming clumsy at all. It managed to use various martial arts techniques that flowed seamlessly like water. Their execution was simply flawless. At the same time, the immense power of the alchemy colossus was not weakened by the execution. Seeing that a humorous weirm was approaching, Angelano cursed loudly while spinning the giant spear in his hand, stirring up a gust of wind before slamming it into the skeleton that made him feel disgusted. There was a loud bang, and the massive humorous weirm rolled backwards with a single blow, and only stabilized itself again when it was hundreds of meters away. Anyone with a good eyesight would be able to tell that the sternum of the humorous weirm had cracked due to the blow like glass that got hit by a stone. The bones even scattered and fell continuously with the movements of the humorous weirm. If it were a one-on-one or even one-on-two battle, it would probably take a few rounds before the humorous weirms would really be smashed into broken pieces of bones, like Angelano had cursed. Unfortunately, before Angelano could chase after it, 2 humorous weirms emerged from nearby and entangled him. He was so infuriated that he could only stomp his feet in the alchemy colossus and curse out loud. The delay allowed the heavily wounded humorous weirm to recover quickly with the help of the waves of death aura. It then pounced on him again fearlessly to join in the battle. When humorous weirms were shrouded in thick fog of death aura, it would be difficult to hurt them unless their soul fire was directly extinguished, as any damage done to them would be quickly healed. That made everyone feel very helpless. Of course, killing one or two humorous weirms wouldn't really have any real influence on the overall battle situation. The humorous weirms in the canyon were only half of the humorous weirms army. There were still more than 50 humorous weirms in the sky that were constantly looking for opportunities to intervene in the battle. The terrain of the canyon had undeniably given the expedition team a great advantage. Otherwise, the 100-odd humorous weirms would all surge in. That would be a catastrophe for the expedition team. Angelano and the mages of the Tower of Dusk managed to take down 30 out of the 50-odd humorous weirms that had rushed into the canyon, greatly relieving the pressure on the other three teams. However, even then, that didn't mean that the other three teams had it easy. The battle arrays that they used were considered products that the High Elves had made for fun during the Dark Age. They could not be compared to the magic net array that had been created by Garesco, the god of mages. The situation of the team from the Glitter Gold Trade Union was somewhat better. Firstly, they had 10 magical crystal cannons that were loaded with legendary magical crystals. The power of every light from the cannon was as powerful as a legendary level magical spell. They managed to blast away the humorous weirms that almost rushed towards them with the 10 magical crystal cannons. Otherwise, once the humorous weirms rushed into the battlefield, the consequences would be unimaginable. Another reason was the combat support provided by the Lord of Nightmares, the Demon Gordon, and the Crimson Dragon. The 3 legendary level combatants could not join the magic array set up by the mages of the Tower of Dusk. Hence, under the orders of Lin Li, they joined the team of the Glitter Gold Trade Union. To a certain extent, they increased the strength of the Glitter Gold Trade Union's team. Although the Lord of Nightmares did not have a low level, his forte was casting spiritual attacks, which basically didn't work too well against humorous weirms that were not sentient. Of course, he wasn't only good at spiritual attacks, but he could only fight against one humorous weirm using the other attacking methods. Hence, during the battle, the Lord of Nightmares did not fight the humorous weirms one-on-one. Instead, it chose to tread through the team of the Glitter Gold Trade Union and occasionally provide support wherever there was danger. In comparison, in the battle with the humorous weirms, the Demon Gordon was somewhat like a fish in water. With the large amount of precious magical metals that he had devoured, Gordon's body had been strengthened to the maximum, and the strong claws of the humorous weirms that could tear metal apart could not even do the slightest damage to his body. The humorous weirm had a highly corrosive dragon breath, but it only made the metallic luster on Gordon's body shine even brighter. With that physical advantage, the arms of Gordon the demon turned into huge scythes that looked like sharp blades, blocking 2 humorous weirms at the edge of the Glitter Gold Trade Union's battle formation. The consumption of a large amount of magical metals gave him strong defense, as well as astonishing attack capability. The scythes on his arms that could be transformed at will were no less sharp than any magical weapon. Whenever the light of the blades he wielded collided with the humorous weirm, it would produce a large amount of powdered bone and debris, making it look like heavy snowfall. However, there were too many humorous weirms, and whenever one of them was badly injured, it would immediately be replaced by another one. In no time, it would be as good as new and pounce on them again ferociously. That was also because Gordon's level was not high. If he had level 24 power at the moment, he might really be able to kill several humorous weirms. Of course, the Demon Gordon could grow to his current self not because of his accumulation in the Endless Abyss. When he was released by Lin Li in the Sky Castle, he was much weaker. After Lin Li subdued the Demon Gordon, Lin Li nurtured him. Regardless of whether it was for his own curiosity, he had given him plenty of precious magical metals in the Abyss. He even let Gordon devour a piece of the divinity metal that he had brought back from the Endless World. That was not something that the rest of his kind could compare to. If the Demon Gordon were to return to the Endless Abyss, he would probably be a powerful existence that was at the same level as a Lord of the Abyss. The divinity metal, in particular, opened a door to evolution for him. He was set on an evolutionary path that no other of his kind had ever taken. All along, demons like Gordon had relied on devouring magical metals to continuously evolve, and if there were no more magical metals for them to devour, it would mean that there was no more room for evolution. However, after devouring the divinity metal, the evolutionary nature of the divinity metal gave him the ability to constantly evolve without having to devour magical metals. The evolution might be slower than if he were to devour magical metals, but it also gave him infinite potential to evolve, and it might even be possible for him to enter the sanctuary realm with enough time. On the other side of the Demon Gordon, Lin Li's humorous Crimson Dragon was entangled with 3 humorous weirms. In terms of level, the humorous Crimson Dragon was actually superior to the humorous weirms, and was above level 22, like Lin Li mentioned. However, Lin Li was worried that it might lose control under the suppression of the Ice Blast Weir, Sindera. Hence, he allowed it to stay behind to assist the expedition in fighting the humorous Weirs. After all, the Ice Blast Weir Sindera would only extremely suppress the humorous Crimson Dragon in level, be it as a Weir or an undead creature. Although the humorous Crimson Dragon's soul fire had integrated the heart of the fallen, and it already possessed a certain amount of sentience, it was still not strong enough to compete with the might of the Ice Blast Weir, Sindera. However, for the humorous Weirs, the humorous Crimson Dragon was an absolutely powerful opponent. Compared to being just bones, the humorous Crimson Dragons had a complete body, and it was far more powerful than the humorous Weirs, both in terms of defensive abilities and physical strength. At the same time, it also had the power of the bloodline of Crimson Dragons. Not only could it spew the corrosive dragon breath of the humorous Weirs, it could also cast even more powerful dragon language magic than them. In addition to the advantages brought by the body of the Crimson Dragon, the humorous Crimson Dragon's soul fire was also fused with the heart of the fallen. Ordinary humorous Weirs were also far from comparable to it in terms of battle consciousness. During battles, the humorous Crimson Dragon was much more technical, and refrained from using brute force like humorous Weirs. It could be said that even at the same level, it would not be difficult for the humorous Crimson Dragon to kill a humorous Weir. In reality, if it weren't for the suppression of the Ice Blast Weir Sindera, which was on a higher level, the humorous Crimson Dragon might even subdue the bunch of humorous Weirs, using its own power and sentience. The various advantages allowed the humorous Crimson Dragon not only to stay strong while fighting the three humorous Weirs, but also to suppress them. Thanks to the terrain of the canyon, the Demon Gordon and the humorous Crimson Dragon managed to withstand half of the pressure for the Glitter Gold Trade Union's team. The Lord of Nightmares was in the middle of the team, and was ensuring their safety like a firefighter. With the support of the three legendary powerhouses, and the mages of the Tower of Dusk, the team of the Glitter Gold Trade Union basically only had to deal with one side of the enemy. The 10 magical crystal cannons shot continuously, but there were no enemy casualties for a while. Compared to the Glitter Gold Trade Union, the team from the Mithril Alliance and Caesar family did not have the magical crystal cannons that were loaded with legendary magical crystals, nor did they have the help of strong legendary powerhouses. With only their battle formations that were originally used for gladiatorial arenas, it was simply impossible for them to survive under the attack of the humorous Weirs. Thus, as soon as the battle began, the two teams once again threw out their respective trump cards, and managed to temporarily avoid the tragedy of being wiped out together. After the battle with the Whispering God, the Mithril Alliance's combat prowess was far worse than usual due to the fact that only healing potions were used to treat the wounded. Besides, the subsequent battle with the behemoth beast skeletons and the ghosts caused them to have less than half of their usual combat strength. They could be considered the weakest amongst the four teams. However, since Joseph had not chosen to withdraw from the expedition, he naturally still had something to fall back on. During the battle with the Whispering God, Joseph revealed one of his trump cards, which was the summoning of the Abyssal Demon Dragon. Actually, with the abilities of the Abyssal Demon Dragon, there would be no problem for him to use it as a trump card that could turn the situation around during a critical juncture. Unfortunately, as soon as the Abyssal Demon Dragon appeared, it had to face the extremely perverted Whispering God, and as a result, it was killed without even getting a chance to showcase its abilities. If the Abyssal Demon Dragon was there, it would definitely play a much greater role in the battle against the humorous Weirs. Unfortunately, the Abyssal Demon Dragon could not be summoned easily. The former patriarch of the Dida family had died because the summoning of the Abyssal Demon Dragon backfired. Without sufficient power, summoning the Abyssal Demon Dragon would be courting death. However, not being able to summon the Abyssal Demon Dragon didn't mean that they could not summon other Abyssal Demons. That was the other trump card of the Mithril Alliance. At the beginning of the battle, the four families of the Mithril Alliance, except the Dida family, began chanting the Abyssal Demon summoning curse. All of a sudden, the open space that the team was in was covered in 6-pointed star arrays of various sizes. The Dida family was excluded because the curse to summon the Abyssal Demon had been classified as an absolute secret in the Dida family. Except for a few elders, the others could not learn it. Even Charles, who had been the patriarch of the family for 2 years, did not learn the curse. However, to the Dida family's surprise, the curse that they had regarded as a precious treasure had unknowingly been learned by every archmage of the 4 major families. Hence, when they saw the people around them summoning the abyssal demons, the faces of the members of the Dida family grew extremely sullen. Judging from the types of abyssal demons summoned, it was clear that there had been some planning carried out by the 4 major families. They had not summoned a mishmash of creatures, and instead focused mainly on a few types of abyssal demons. The mages of Joseph's family summoned a claw demon that lived on the 7th floor of the abyss. It was over 2 meters tall, with a body that was shaped like a chimpanzee. However, its arms were almost as thick as an adult's waist. It had sharp, glittering claws on the fingertips of its gigantic hands that were about a meter long, which was the reason for its name. The level of the claw demons wasn't very high. They were about level 16 to 17, and their resistance to magic wasn't very strong, either. They were just right to be subdued by the archmages. However, even then, the power of the claw demons was rather impressive, and they could easily cut hard rocks into pieces with their scythe-like claws. It would probably take 5 human warriors of the same level to rival one claw demon, not considering the factor of the battle formation. Besides, they would also have to pay a huge price. The mages of Joseph's family summoned more than 40 claw demons at once, greatly increasing the strength of the team. However, that alone was not enough for them to fight against the humorous worms. The mages of the Elvis family had summoned blood flame winged serpents, which were only as thick as 2 fingers of a human. Their bodies were sanguine in color as if they had been soaked in blood. However, they were all more than 5 meters long, and there were pairs of fleshy wings, whose shape was similar to that of the wings of worms on their backs. Of course, they were much smaller in size. Although those wings weren't large, they moved rather quickly, and it would be difficult for the human eye to catch the serpent's trajectory when it was as fast as lightning. It was said that the blood flame winged serpent's body also possessed the bloodline of the ancient worms. However, other than the shape of their fleshy wings, there were no other features of theirs that could be associated with worms. The blood flame winged serpent spat out blood flames that resembled saliva, but it was not any less dangerous than the breath of worms. What was contained in that blood flame was not the power to burn or corrode, but a power that could make everything decompose. A brand new armor would instantly become old and decayed as if it had undergone thousands of years of wear and tear, and eventually turn into a pile of ashes, as long as it came into contact with a tiny bit of blood flames. Apart from spitting flames, the blood flame winged serpent could also attack with its body. The surface of its body was covered with several fine, sharp jagged teeth from head to tail, unlike the smooth scales of ordinary snakes. When it moved at an extremely high speed, it would be like a menacing long, jagged whip that could rip a heavily armored warrior into pieces with a single blow. Since it could use its body as a weapon, the strength of the blood flame winged serpent was imaginable. Although it was only as thick as the fingers of an adult, it was as strong as a real worm, and ordinary weapons could not do any damage to its body at all. Although, like the claw demon, it was less resistant to magic. The blood flames that it spat that could make everything decay had the same effect on magic. It would disintegrate magical spells, and that more or less made up for its weakness. After the claw demon and the blood flame winged serpent, the mages of the other 2 families summoned the same type of abyssal demon, known as the abyssal shield demon. The abyssal shield demon was not large in size, and its height was about a meter. Its limbs were short and thick, and it had 2 horns on its head, as well as a black shield-shaped armor on its back. The abyssal shield demon's attacking power was horrible. The black shield on its back was the reason it could survive in the endless abyss. Although it looked somewhat like a turtle, its defensive method was not to hide its head and limbs in its shell. There was a defensive magical rune that was able to generate a powerful defensive force field that basically could not be shaken by offensive spells of the same level on them. Of course, just looking at it that way, being able to resist attacks of the same level didn't seem to be too impressive. After all, with the level of most abyssal shield demons, they could only be considered to be at the bottom of the ranks in the endless abyss. However, one of their greatest characteristics was that the magic runes on the armor of the abyssal shield demons would resonate with each other, and the power of the defensive force field would overlap to create an even stronger one. Legend had it that if the defensive force fields of hundreds of level 15 abyssal shield demons were overlapped, offensive spells below the sanctuary realm would not be able to shake the force field at all. If there were 1,000 of them, even a sanctuary powerhouse wouldn't be able to do anything to them. No one knew the origin of that magic rune, and even a master of inscription could not replicate it, so perhaps it could only be called a miracle of nature. The magical rune was the reason the abyssal shield demons could be found in every corner of the endless abyss, and rumor had it that the largest group of abyssal shield demons lived in the deepest part of the abyss, where even the gods did not dare to set foot in. The 2 major families of the Mithril Alliance summoned a total of more than 80 abyssal shield demons, but unfortunately they did not come from the same group. Instead, they were from 3 separate groups. After all, no matter how powerful the summoning curse was, there was no way they could reach that level of precision. However, there were more than 1,000 groups of abyssal shield demons in the endless abyss, and the fact that they could summon more than 80 abyssal shield demons from only 3 separate groups was already extremely fortunate for them. Thus, more than 40 claw demons, 40-odd blood flame winged serpents, and 80-odd abyssal shield demons formed the Demon Legion of the Mithril Alliance. With the power of the Demon Legion, the overall strength of the Mithril Alliance was greatly increased, and they could barely fight the humorous weirms. Of course, it still didn't mean that the Mithril Alliance was truly able to contend with the humorous weirms. It only meant that they could barely survive the crazy attacks of the humorous weirms. After all, the powerful humorous weirms that they were facing were all above the legendary level, while the abyssal demons that were summoned were only at most level 17 or 18. If not for the magic net array, the difference in strength could not be made up for with quantity. The only thing was that the abyssal demons truly lived in an environment as harsh as the endless abyss, unlike the human warriors. Despite facing the strong and powerful humorous weirms, they did not have the slightest bit of fear at all. Instead, they seemed to have been provoked as they all appeared rather menacing. Although the clawed demons were taller than humans on average, they were still somewhat small, compared to the massive humorous weirms. However, they were not bothered by it at all. They waved their scythe-shaped claws and surrounded the humorous weirms. Some even hugged the legs of the humorous weirms, seemingly trying to shave off some bones. The blood flame winged serpents even turned into rays of sanguine lighting, as they continuously whipped the bones of the humorous weirm like a whiplash, causing incessant crisp sounds of lashing. Whenever they brushed past the humorous weirms, there would be some pieces of bones being shaved off. However, the blood flame winged serpent's other weapon, spitting out blood flames, did not have much of an effect on the humorous weirms. It was probably impossible to make the bones of the humorous weirms decay quickly even for the king of blood flame winged serpents, let alone small fries that were only at level 15 or 16. As for the 80-odd abyssal shield demons, if they had been from the same group, they might be allowed the people of the Mithril Alliance to stay safe as long as they hid in the defensive force field, even if they were humorous weirms bombarding them maniacally from outside. Unfortunately, they came from 3 different groups. Although the overlapped defensive force fields of tens of abyssal shield demons had incredible defensive power as well, they could only resist several attacks of the humorous weirms. The intervals between the recovery periods of the defensive force fields would become the hardest period for the Mithril Alliance. During those periods, casualties would be inevitable, be it the warriors of the Mithril Alliance or the summoned abyssal demons. They were all too weak and fragile compared to the humorous weirms. Not far from the Mithril Alliance was the team from the Caesar family. In the beginning, the Caesar family should have been considered the weakest of the 4 teams, but they were definitely competent since they could gain independence from the Mithril Alliance and rise as their equals. When the Mithril Alliance summoned the Abyssal Demon Legion, the members of the Caesar family did not sit back and do nothing. After Claus left with the elders, the remaining executives of the Caesar family, who stayed behind, immediately began preparations to face the humorous weirms. From the moment they entered the mausoleum, they each had a somewhat thick and long beast hide pocket, which had never been opened even when they were facing the Whispering God. No one except themselves knew what was inside. At this moment, the beast hide pockets were finally opened, and the items within were revealed. They turned out to be wooden rods that were identical in length and thickness and vibrant in color. Each wooden rod was almost a meter long and had the thickness of a human wrist. There were fine and complex patterns carved in them, and they were all colorful. The Caesar family took out a total of 20 such rods, and they began to stick them into the ground one by one according to some strange pattern. Next, the mages of the Caesar family began chanting some strange incantations that actually seemed more like a prayer. As the mages chanted, the team from the Caesar family rose into the air, and pillars of light suddenly shot down from the void, landing precisely on the wooden rods that had been stuck into the ground. The wooden rods began to grow rapidly in thickness and length as if they were trees that had been spawned there. They quickly transformed from wrist-thin rods to pillars that were nearly 10 meters tall. At this moment, the patterns carved in the pillars had also become much clearer. Those who were learned and knowledgeable immediately recognized that those pillars were actually the war totem poles that were used by the shamans of the orcs. There were no mages amongst the orcs, but the shamans of the orcs possessed mystical powers that were not inferior to magic. They believed in the beast god and prayed to him to grant them mystical powers in exchange for their worship. Creating war totem poles was one of the most important abilities they had acquired. Every shaman had to begin creating a war totem pole that belonged to them from the moment they received the power from the beast god. Of course, a war totem pole was definitely worth the efforts of the shaman, as each one contained a massive amount of power and the shaman's enlightenment on the power bestowed by the beast god. In the understanding of the mages, it was akin to solidifying a powerful magical spell on a totem pole. Of course, it had to be a little more complicated than that in reality. Whenever a shaman created a war totem pole, his or her own strength would also improve tremendously, hence, the number of war totem poles would also be closely related to the strength of the shaman. A shaman, who had created 10 war totem poles, would be equivalent to a legendary powerhouse, and after summoning 10 war totem poles, his or her strength would be greatly increased again. It was said that in the current orc kingdom, the shaman Isekaied, who was in the sanctuary realm and had led the orcs to rebel against the high elves, possessed hundreds of war totem poles. During the war at the end of the Dark Age, he'd even managed to defeat one of the purportedly invincible sky castles with the power gained from summoning all of the war totem poles. In the history of Anral, the war totem poles had left a deep impression on the people, and after the Dark Age ended, there were several large-scale wars between the orcs and the human kingdoms. Under the influence of the war totem poles, the orc warriors managed to increase their strength by 5 to 10 times in a short period of time. Whenever the shadow of the war totem poles appeared on the battlefield, it meant that regardless of the outcome of the battle, the humans would definitely pay a hefty price. However, the orc shamans often held a position that was no less than that of the chief in their own tribe. They would generally not leave their tribe easily unless it was a war where everyone was mobilized. There were no orc shamans in the Caesar family, and the war totem poles also looked like antiques. They had to have been obtained from some high elves' relic collection. That was precisely the reason that they kept the war totem poles in their beast hide pockets. Real orc shamans would stow them away in their own special storage spaces. At the same time that the war totem poles lit up, several rather dazzling, superimposed halos appeared beneath the feet of the warriors and mages of the Caesar family. Every halo bestowed different effects, such as courage, excitement, a strengthened body, massive strength, hot blood, boosted recovery, and so on. When they overlap, they caused the strength of the Caesar family's team to surge several times over. In fact, that was not even half of the power of the war totem pole. If they were in the hands of the real orcs, the safety of the Caesar family's team would be guaranteed once 20 war totem poles were erected on the condition that the ice blast weir Sindera did not descend to attack them. However, even with half the power of the war totem poles, the team of the Caesar family could rival the humorous weirms to a certain extent. Besides, compared to the Mithril Alliance that had summoned the Abyssal Demon Legion, the Caesar family was in a better situation. The Mithril Alliance's battle formation became a little messy and chaotic because of the addition of the Demon Legion, which was one of the reasons for their continuous casualties. The power of the war totem poles had merely increased the individual strength of the Caesar family's members, allowing them to continue using familiar battle formations while suffering smaller casualties. However, be it the Tower of Dusk and Glitter Gold Trade Union, which were dealing with the situation effortlessly, or the Mithril Alliance and Caesar family, which were struggling to survive, everyone knew that the current stalemate was actually very unfavorable to the expedition. The teams of the Tower of Dusk and the Glitter Gold Trade Union had been suffering casualties. It was not unrelated to the Tower of Dusk and the Glitter Gold Trade Union. If those two parties were to be destroyed and annihilated by the humorous weirms, the Glitter Gold Trade Union and Tower of Dusk would face greater pressure. Could they still stay unharmed then? In fact, it wasn't even necessary to wait for things to reach that point. Perhaps the situation had already deteriorated to the point where it couldn't be salvaged. The senior members of the 4 teams all had a vague feeling that although the humorous weirms were attacking ferociously, it was because their bodies were strong to begin with. In fact, those attacks were probably just a probing attack. For those humorous weirms that only had fighting instincts, that might be somewhat unimaginable, but not to forget, there was a strong sanctuary realm ice blast weirm in the sky. Regardless of its origin, there was definitely no shortage of battle instinct within it, since it could become the leader of the humorous weirms. In such circumstances, the teams of the 4 major families clearly couldn't get rid of the hundreds of humorous weirms step by step. For now, they could only hope that the legendary powerhouses who were fighting the ice blast weirm in the sky would be able to achieve victory before the expedition team's defense fell apart. However, many of the legendary powerhouses in the sky knew that it was impossible to expect the teams below to destroy the humorous weirms in advance. The key to surviving the crisis at hand was still to find a way to defeat the ice blast weirm. Otherwise, they would end up dying together. However, having thought of the key to surviving the crisis did not mean that one had the ability to solve it, because the difference in power was simply too big. Yes, the difference was too big. Even though there were nearly 20 legendary powerhouses who were above level 22 in the expedition, as well as other elite powerhouses like Lin Li and the rest who were at level 24, the reality had proven that their power was insufficient for them to fight the ice blast weirm Sindera. In fact, since the time their group flew up into the sky to face the ice blast weirm Sindera, they barely managed to launch any attacks and were almost completely suppressed by Cinder's power. Instead of fighting it head-on, they seemed to be getting beaten up. They could only continuously defend and evade. Any careless mistakes would cause them to end up falling. From the start of the battle until now, only 10 minutes had passed, but it felt like a century. However, every second was difficult because they were struggling with all their might between life and death. No one knew if they would still be alive in the next second. The legendary powerhouses who had originally planned to besiege the Ice Blast Weir were no longer scattered in all directions as they had been in the beginning, but had begun gathering. They hoped that they could survive the Ice Blast Weir's attacks. However, they all knew that they were just struggling, and even if their defenses didn't collapse under the attacks of the Ice Blast Weir, they would still be unable to avoid annihilation. The two peak legendary level powerhouses Confronting, who had the perfect body, and Lin Li, who had the debris of the stars, holy light, could occasionally launch some counterattacks against the Ice Blast Weir. However, the effects of their counterattacks were minimal, and they would only bring about disappointment, which turned into despair. All new chapters in November, been calm. However, regardless of whether the others were disappointed or desperate, Lin Li never gave up looking for opportunities. So what if they were facing an existence that was on par with the flame dragon Lothar? He was still alive, hence, he couldn't give up easily. Although it hadn't been many years since he had arrived in the world of Anril, Lin Li had gone through many near-death experiences, and had even experienced more than those old men, who had lived for hundreds of years. Lin Li could make it that far partly because of his abilities, but also to a large extent because of his never say die attitude. With the help of the power of the space-related magical robe, Lin Li's figure constantly flickered in the sky, dodging the deadly and powerful magical spells cast by the Ice Blast Weir. He seized a fleeting opportunity to raise the Helios scepter. Although there was no magical domain for strengthening, Lin Li could still condense the giant light and darkness sword immediately with the power of holy light and gloomy dark. It was as if the light and darkness sword had cut through the sky and slashed towards the Ice Blast Weir. Holy light did not manage to provide any purification. Among the attack methods that Lin Li had mastered, the light and darkness sword was still the most powerful one. Although the light and darkness sword would sometimes be worn out halfway through its trajectory and end up being unable to break through the hard and cold armor of the Ice Blast Weir, Lin Li still refused to give up. He continued to use it. Although Lin Li had 5 more powerful pieces of the debris of the stars other than holy light and gloomy dark, his mastery of those 5 was far inferior to that of holy light and gloomy dark. Lin Li knew very well that, after all, he was still only at the pinnacle of the legendary realm. Without the stars of fury, he could not fight a powerful existence like the Ice Blast Weir using the other 5 pieces of the debris of the stars that he wasn't familiar enough with. Actually, the attacks launched with the light and darkness sword were not entirely ineffective. At least, Lin Li could feel that the intensity of the magical spells cast by the Ice Blast Weir seemed to have decreased greatly when his light and darkness sword slashed down on the Ice Blast Weir. Actually, that was also the reason the other legendary powerhouses could survive till now. Otherwise, given the strength of the Ice Blast Weir, they would have probably long fallen one by one. However, from another perspective, the legendary powerhouses who were doing their best to defend themselves could be said to have taken some of the pressure off Lin Li. If they collapsed and fell, Lin Li would be left alone to deal with all the power of the Ice Blast Weir. Lin Li's ending would be terrible as well. Did the other party also instinctively fear the light and darkness sword? As soon as that thought arose in Lin Li's heart, he immediately found it a little absurd. After all, the other party was an ancient Weir that was on the same level as the flame dragon Lothar. It could be considered a demigod. How could it fear such an attack? However, if that was not the case, there would be no other explanation for the current situation. Could it be that the Ice Blast Weir, that had already lost its sentience, still had the intention of playing cat and mouse? Apart from Lin Li, the only legendary powerhouse that still had the ability to resist the suppression of the Ice Blast Weir was Confronting, who had the perfect body. Although, according to the Ashen Warlock, the perfect body created by the High Lord Osric was far from perfect, and could not be compared to any divine body. The perfect body was undoubtedly not inferior to the Weirs and Titans in all aspects. After being trapped in the hammer for thousands of years, Confronting finally had a body that he was satisfied with. He obviously wouldn't be willing to give it away just like that, not even to the Ice Blast Weir. He waved the Eternal Frost Blade in his hand, and continuously chanted ancient demonic runes that almost no one could understand, casting bizarre and powerful magical spells that were beyond the realm of magical domains. A circle of space-related magical ripples surrounded Confronting's body and continued to spread around. Whenever the magical spells cast by the Ice Blast Weir space power landed in them, they would become extremely slow as if they had fallen deep into a swamp. While the ripples were moving, the power in the magical spells was constantly stripped away. Seeing that Lin Li had thrown out the light and darkness sword, and the power of the Ice Blast Weir seemed to have faintly been restrained, Connorus immediately chanted 16 demonic runes without hesitation. As soon as the demonic runes appeared, a 100-meter-tall demon deity shadow suddenly appeared behind Connorus. It had 2 horns on its head and a pair of wings on its back. As it took shape, it punched at the ice blast weir. Bang! The demon deity shadow punched into the sky, but it let out a loud sound that resembled that of an object landing. At the same time, the thick fog of death aura that surrounded the ice blast weir seemed to have also been swept into a gust of wind, reaching the extent that it began dispersing. In fact, it could even be seen that there were some faint crystal clear ice chips flying everywhere in the midst of it. It did seem to have good momentum, but everyone knew that that attack unfortunately could not do any damage to the ice blast weir at all, because Connorus had previously done the same thing more than once during the battle. All his attempts produced the same result. After the demon deity shadow struck a punch, its giant fist was suddenly covered in silvery white frost, while the frost also spread rapidly along its arm and towards the figure. Connorus did not dare to slow down at all. He quickly chanted the demonic runes and warded off the demon deity shadow that had condensed. At the same time, he also evaded quickly like lightning. The demon deity shadow dissipated, but its frost-covered arm had exploded in the air, making that portion of space seem like it had just experienced snowfall. The demon deity shadow was a condensation of Connorus' mana. Losing an arm would be akin to losing a portion of mana. Although Connorus had a perfect body and an extremely high mana recovery speed, they were in the turf of the ice blast weir Cinderella. Even Lin Li's mana recovery speed was less than half of what it usually was, let alone Connorus. Damn it, I lost another arm. Had I known that Cinderella would be here, I wouldn't have come with you even if I were to get beaten up. Having just had a close shave, Connorus dealt with the ensuing attacks while complaining to Lin Li in exasperation. It had only been a short time since he had obtained that body, and he hadn't even had the chance to enjoy the wonderful experience of having it, yet he was dragged into such a desperate situation. Could it be that I'm destined to be a soul without a body? No, if I die here, I might not even get to keep my soul.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.